Chapter 809. No matter who comes, they'll have to play chess first. No matter how many come, the chessboard may still have secret helpers. This is unbreakable. Kawa was disdainful. These cultivators from the outer lands were not knowledgeable enough, and only knew how to take advantage of others. How can a divine object like the heaven and earth chessboard be biased towards one side on purpose? If that's the case, how can it transform into precepts? The basis of the chessboard is to ensure that Zhou Xian will never be ambushed in the upper realm. As for the chessboard, what kind of realm strength can surpass Zhou Xian's in terms of cultivators? With the elites of the 9 great upper sects coming out, even yawning will be an easy task. People like you and me can't even be chess pieces. Lu Xiai sighed. The battle style of the upper realm of Zhou Xian did not seem to be very friendly to swordsmen. He had only been here for a few decades and had already participated in a life-and-death game on the chessboard. Now he had to do it again. Is it Chinese chess? Kawan knew that this fellow knew nothing about chess. He was just an idiot. However, most cultivators who came from unorthodox backgrounds were like this. They were limited to their own little world. How could they have the opportunity to view the world from the perspective of the entire realm? You're underestimating the ability of the heaven and earth chessboard. The heaven and earth chessboard can be set up with any game. Go, Chinese chess, Liuba, Zaishi, Fengwu, Tanqi, Shuanglu, Pu Pu, and so on. Each game is different depending on the realm, the number of people, and the situation. For a battle like ours, if we don't set up the Go and Chinese chess games, it's the Liuba competition. In Lu Xiaoyi's mind, the Liuba chessboard immediately appeared. Horse, king, rook, pawn, minister, pawn, pawn, minister, pawn, horse, king. Rook. This was the predecessor of modern Chinese chess. When playing, 6 chopsticks were thrown. The 6 chopsticks would determine which of the 6 pieces would move. 2 people would take turns throwing chopsticks to determine which piece to move. It was up to the heavens to decide which move to play, but there were many choices for which move to make, and it all depended on the player's wisdom. Later on, Chinese chess evolved to the point where the will of the heavens was removed, and it all depended on one's wisdom. However, it was still more scientific to add a bit of luck, because nothing was changed by one's will. Heaven determined a part of it, and man determined a part of it. Obtaining an inevitable victory by chance seemed to show the true colors of a hero. If it's a situation of expulsion where Buddhism has the advantage, then... Kawa smiled. Then we'll have 3 more pawns, and we'll be at the top. Who threw the chopsticks? 1, 2, but the chopsticks are derived from the chessboard of heaven and earth, so it is impossible to cheat. How troublesome. Couldn't they just have a good fight in the sky? Do you have to set up these rules and regulations to restrict me? If I really go out of the universe, would I still have to bring the chessboard of heaven and earth with me? Kawa looked at him with disdain. Letting the cultivators get used to the chessboard of heaven and earth is to guard against the attack of the universe's powerful forces. At that time, every cultivator would know what they should do and how to do it. As for the battle outside the universe, that's another matter. Lu Xiaoyi was very curious. I rarely read the history of Zhou Xian, and the records of this part of history from tens of thousands of years ago are also vague. I just want to ask, has our Zhou Xian been attacked before? Kawa was melancholy. History is hidden in the long river of time. If you don't reach that position, who can really understand it? It seems like it has been attacked before, but it definitely wasn't taken down. Otherwise, would there still be Zhou Xian now? Lu Xiaoyi laughed. The people of Zhou Xian probably didn't understand the story of a wolf turning into a 5-ring. When I grew up, I became you. I don't think so, right? Maybe it was taken down, and then it continued to evolve and develop? In any case, the chessboard of heaven and earth protects this world, and not a specific person? Well, this might also explain why the chessboard of heaven and earth was changed to Zhou Xian. The mortal pilgrims and believers who were under the control of the 3 cultivation forces no longer took the initiative to preach, nor did they stay for long. Like normal tourists, they stayed for a few days and then left. The gangsters in Bachin Prefecture also received a warning. The ones who took action were the Lower Ghost sect, whose influence among the locals was deeply rooted. Right and wrong disappeared without a trace, but this wasn't the end. The mortal affairs were just the surface, and the battle between Taoists and Buddhists had just begun. This was going to be the battle between cultivators. He also wouldn't study the Liuba and Shuanglu because of this. There was no need. Swordsman, just sharpen your sword. Lu Xiaoyi didn't have many urgent things to do now. As for the undercover mission, this was a long-term thing. In the short term, finding Zhu Qing was the most important thing. The most important thing was, who was the Yuanying who pushed back their memories? He wouldn't be grateful to Xiao Bingji just because he got a beauty for a year because of the memory reversal. He knew very well that if Xiao Bingji didn't pull him into the cocoon space, even if that Yuanying didn't make a move, he would have been turned into slag under the bombardment of a group of Jin Dan. Therefore, there was no room for reconciliation. How to find the Yuanying? There were about 2 ways. One was to go to Red Hill and find the Red Earth Chamber of Commerce. The person behind them must be related to the Yuanying. The second was Xiao Bingji. This woman's master was very powerful, and with the influence and connections of the Huangting Taoism itself, it wouldn't be difficult to find out who did it. He didn't want to trouble the woman because of the unclear relationship between them. He didn't know how to face it, let alone ask for information. The most important thing was that his current strength wasn't enough to deal with a high-level Yuanying in a normal face-to-face battle. He actually had another stupid way, which was to not ask for help. If the Yuanying came from the 9 great sects, he only needed to walk around a few divine mountains to find the whereabouts of the Jew's city sword spirit. The connection between the swordsman and his sword spirit couldn't be completely hidden, but this kind of search was full of uncertainty. How could he go to the mountain gate when the swordsman was at the mountain gate? The premise of everything was his own strength. The only thing he could do was to leave a message to Yu Hu. It was the most suitable thing for him to do, and he hoped that this guy would bring him accurate information. In Shajia, he became a complete idler and had the power to control his own time. As far as he knew, senior brother Fan Tong had taken his advice and started to guard the few provinces bordering the 2 sides. There was no other purpose other than to force the monks to use their trump cards. As far as he knew, the 10 free and unfettered cultivators on Shajia continent were all transferred by Jinren Zhao from the free and unfettered continent in recent years to prepare for the final chessboard of heaven and earth. Among them, there were a few senior brothers. However, it was hard to say whether they had a big advantage because the 1,000 Buddhas were also mobilizing their troops. There were many similar continents around the free and unfettered travel that were fighting with the 1,000 Buddhas and other Taoist sections. No one knew which continent would change first, so it was impossible to mobilize the strongest experts here. Their current combination was the strongest response that the free and unfettered travel could come up with. Chapter 810. It continued to be calm, the calm before the storm. His life and cultivation had a very regular pattern. It was so regular that when he arrived at Chow's bun shop in the early morning, he would be able to make it in time for the first steamer of big buns. He liked to eat buns, especially those with thin skin and big stuffing. It would be accompanied by a big bowl of golden yellow sticky millet porridge and a plate of seasonal pickles. On top of that, he would pour 2 big spoonfuls of chili oil. It was not that he needed this bit of energy, but it was because this was a part of life. The Creator had given humans a body and every part had the right to use it. The hands had to wield swords, the feet had to run, and the mouth had the right to speak. Other than speaking, there was also the right to eat good food. The teeth had the right to chew, the stomach had the right to digest, the big and small intestines had the right to absorb, and the sphincter had the right to excrete. Humans had the right to live. The Shajia people did not have the habit of waking up too early. This land was a land where the pace of life was very slow. Therefore, even though Lu Xiaoyi had finished his morning chores and arrived at the bun shop, there were only a few customers and the first steamer of buns. The millet porridge had just been cooked. He found a table and faced a customer. It should be Musclehead, who woke up early to work. He was simple and honest with a hint of dullness. Among the customers who did not wake up early, he could be considered a familiar face. The waiter brought over a plate of buns. Just as it came out of the drawer, the snow-white skin of the buns was steaming hot and emitted a faint meaty aroma. Lu Xiaoyi took the dipping plate and poured a little vinegar. He nodded towards Musclehead and pointed at the can of chili oil in front of him. He politely said, "Excuse me." Although this was just a matter of thought to him, in the mortal world, not using the special abilities of cultivators was also a kind of tacit understanding among cultivators. Musclehead silently picked up the can of chili oil and handed it over. Just as their fingers touched through the can of chili oil, an invisible tremor was transmitted between the two of them. Musclehead raised his head in surprise and his hair stood on end. Under the table, a long sword stabbed into his lower abdomen without any trace of politeness. What followed closely was the inhuman devastation of the sword energy in his body. Yet, the strength was perfectly controlled and not a trace of it leaked out. Unable to hold on to the oil can any longer, Lu Xiaoyi naturally took it and scooped out 2 large spoonfuls of oil. He picked up a bun, dipped it in the seasoning, and put it into his mouth. His eyes were slightly closed as if he was enjoying himself. Fresh meat buns with juicy stuffing. My favorite. His tone changed. Brother, where did you come from? Who's the boss? Who do you work for? Musclehead could only feel thousands of blades piercing through his body, severing all his meridians, acupoints, dantian, and even his soul was no longer intact. His throat was also trembling, and his voice was intermittent and hoarse. Good method. Lu Xiaoyi leisurely enjoyed his steamed buns with a natural expression. The two of them exchanged questions and answers. The shop owner, who was close by, didn't notice anything unusual about the two of them because there were no screams and no blood. You're not bad either. How long have you been following me? Are you tired of eating buns? It wasn't easy. What's in the buns? It must have been hard for you to add something into the buns every day, just waiting for the shop assistant to coincidentally deliver that bun to my plate. Musclehead laughed bitterly. Hunting geese all day long, and being pecked in the eye by the geese today is also fate. My skills are inferior, I have nothing to say. I hope fellow Taoists can always be so lucky. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. This isn't luck. This was a character similar to an assassin. His disguise was at the peak of perfection, and his aura was flawless. Jean Dan's cultivation allowed him to make his aura no different from a normal person's. This kind of ability was something even Lu Xiaoyi himself couldn't achieve. But the only thing he couldn't completely conceal was that faintly discernible trace of luck in his mind. Whether or not a normal person could possess the luck that only chi-sensing cultivators could display, Lu Xiaoyi wasn't sure about this. But at the very least, it made him pay some attention to this person. Until today, when the 4 steamed buns were served, one of them had a goo worm hidden within. This made him immediately understand this person's goal. He had been eating the first steamer of steamed buns just like him, waiting for the goo worm to enter his body. He could only plant the goo worm in advance before Lu Xiaoyi arrived. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to escape his target's perception. Only when the shop assistant served the steamed buns would the swordsman feel at ease and eat them boldly. As an assassin, he didn't lack patience. He knew how important it was to prepare beforehand, so he would rather throw the precious goo worm into one of the steamed buns every morning, losing his chance when the steamed buns were served to other customers, than to act rashly in front of the swordsman. The origin of the goo worm was very rare. He only had one, but it had never failed in assassination. It was called the Heaven and Earth Soul-Leaving Goo Worm. Once it was infected, it would devour everything in the cultivator's mind, spirit, will, memory, and even self. If the shop assistant served the steamed bun with the goo worm to someone else, he wouldn't activate it. He only needed to wait for the swordsman to leave before recalling it from the body of an unrelated customer. Then, he would wait for the next opportunity. This was a Heaven and Earth Soul-Leaving Goo Worm. The temperature of the steamed buns couldn't do anything to it. There were more than 60 steamed buns in the steamer. If the shop assistant took them at will, he would have to rely purely on luck to distribute the goo worm to a specific customer. He also wouldn't try to control the mortal shop assistant. This was the cautiousness of an assassin. He would rather wait for a few more days than leave any traces behind for his target. As such, he ate steamed buns for a month. To be honest, he didn't like this kind of food, but he was willing to eat for a year to achieve his goal. He still failed. He didn't even know where he failed. He had tried his best to cover up for this ruthless swordsman in the sea of clouds outside Red Hill. But before he died, he realized that there was no such thing as best in the cultivation world. Lu Xiaoyi didn't get anything except for a steamed bun. The strange goo worm in the steamed bun didn't die with its owner. This didn't conform to his understanding of the goo Dao. He was grateful for the contact he had with the unorthodox cultivators in the land of exile, especially Taoist Byron. This gave him the most basic understanding of the goo Dao, which was the key to him avoiding the assassination. The Tao of goo was a very unique Tao orthodoxy. It was unlike the Tao of pills, talismans, tools, and formations, which many cultivators more or less dabbled in. The Tao of goo, unless a cultivator deliberately cultivated it, it was very difficult to take both sides at the same time. Therefore, this assassin would never have dreamed that a sword cultivator who had always looked down on unorthodox Tao would have some knowledge in such an unorthodox Tao. He was really haunting. But he wasn't sure which group had sent them. He had many enemies in the upper realm of Zhouxian. The wildebeest bandits were one group, and the Red Earth Merchant Guild was another. Both seemed possible? Chapter 811. Lu Xiaoyi didn't know how many assassins were sent like this. Were they acting alone? Or were they working in groups? However, in the cultivation world, the profession of a killer wasn't flourishing. At least, there weren't any in the Five Rings in Qing Kong. The reason was simple. This profession had already deviated from the original intention of cultivation, so it was difficult for them to have a bright future. Moreover, those assassination methods that were impossible for mortals to guard against were actually not suitable for cultivators. There was no such thing as a peerless expert among the killers. The real powerhouses were all in the big forces. Not only were they strong, but they also had soft strength like the state of mind. Therefore, he still acted like he always did. When he had nothing to do, he would go out and walk around to see if there were any similar things. Soon, a suspicious target appeared in front of him. It was a Jean Dan Kun cultivator. She swayed with every step and was gorgeously dressed. At first glance, it was hard to associate this person with the serious cultivation world. However, she was indeed a Jean Dan cultivator. Contrary to the previous killer who had completely concealed himself, this woman didn't seem to care about her whereabouts at all. For a small land like Shaga, which didn't have any characteristics of cultivation, there were very few strange cultivators coming here. This woman was obviously new to Shaga, so her behavior was somewhat strange. It was still early in the morning in the bun shop. A woman swayed to his table and sat down gracefully. Her beautiful eyes were filled with affection as she lightly opened her red lips. "I haven't eaten for a few days. Young master, please give me a meal." Lu Xiaoyi frowned in disgust. "You have 2 buns, so eat your own. What's wrong with you? Don't you know it's very dangerous? You don't look like a female cultivator. You look like someone who just ran out of a brothel. If you don't know how to put on makeup, then don't. Makeup needs to be matched. It's not that the more you mix, the better. Why do you have to put on so much makeup when you're walking? The more you pretend, the more conspicuous you are. Also, how long have you not changed your clothes?" The woman looked at him pitifully and was very puzzled. "How did you see through me?" Lu Xiaoyi ignored it. "Let's get down to business." Yu Gu tried hard to restrain its urge to throw flirtatious glances. This instinct actually made it helpless. "I don't have any information about what you want to know. It involves the level of yuanying. You know, the bodies I can take are weak Dan with low mental strength. But in the process, I heard some other news. The Red Earth Chamber of Commerce hired assassins to make trouble for you. As soon as I heard that, I hurried here. I hope I can make it in time. Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. It's too late. Just 10 days ago, right where you're sitting, I killed that assassin. But which side sent them? Was it the Red Earth Merchant Guild or the Wildebeest Bandits? How many have come? Yu Gu shook his head. I'm not sure. I also vaguely mentioned it through a middleman, but I didn't have the time to thoroughly investigate. I was afraid that you would be fooled, so I hurried over. However, I've heard that they seem to be looking for trouble with the sect you're from, with the intention of luring the snake out of its hole. But they don't know that you're a fake, so there's no point in luring you. Lu Xiaoyi was very helpless. At that time, there were 3 people who caused trouble. 2 of the women had strong backings, and he was the only one. Although he was also from a sect, his status was incomparable, and there was no thigh to cling to. It was understandable that he was used as a target to vent their anger. These people wouldn't dare to make a move in the carefree continent, but if he came to Little Lu, he would have no more scruples. Bullying the weak and fearing the strong was human nature, and it was the same for cultivators. Considering that he was a new addition to the sect and had no foundation, even if he took revenge, he probably wouldn't attract the attention of the Carefree Travel Association. This was the reason why the assassins came looking for him. Is it possible that the Red Earth Chamber of Commerce hired more people? Lu Xiaoyi asked. Yu Gu nodded. From the way they do things, it seems so. Bandits don't do things endlessly, and they don't have to worry about their reputation. However, it's different for a Chamber of Commerce. In the business circle, if they swallow their anger after their young master and more than 10 Jingdan people were killed, they will be laughed at. They have to do something. Brother Yen, it's better for you to return to the carefree continent. These assassins are hard to guard against, and they won't stop until they achieve their goal, because they can't get the reward. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. I know. It seems that to solve this problem, we have to destroy the Red Earth Chamber of Commerce. Yu Gu asked, do you want me to help you contact Brother Qing Xian? With the 2 of you working together, you won't have to worry about Jingdan's level. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. No need. I'll probably stay in Shajiao for a few more days. It's hard to shirk the sect's mission. Let's not talk about me first. Fellow Taoist Yu, your current body is really uncoordinated. Since you want to hide your tracks, being ordinary is the most important thing. Don't leave a deep impression on others. Why don't I find you a monk's body here? Yu Gu shook his head. Brother Yen, you don't know. In the Zhou Xian upper realm, dual cultivation Kun cultivators are not rare. Instead, it's monks who walk the boundaries that attract attention. If I get a monk's body, it'll be really troublesome in this Taoist world. Don't worry, it's easy to change the form of this body. As long as I open up, it'll be easy to get it. The 2 of them talked for a long time before they went their separate ways. Yu Gu wouldn't stay here. This kind of pure cultivation environment wasn't suitable for him. To him, a place like Red Hill, where good and bad people mix together, was the best place for him to live. As for what form he wanted to live in, that was his personal preference, and couldn't be forced. Things were usually like this. After the Yudu Ghost Festival, things were peaceful for many years. However, the appearance of the assassins seemed to stir up trouble. After the assassins, Yu Gu, came the orders from the Carefree Mountain sect. 10 carefree cultivators gathered at the White Cloud Temple and listened to Fan Tong's message from the Mountain sect. The Mountain sect sent a message. Because the light of 10,000 Buddhas is in a tight situation on several small continents at the same time, there are suspicions that they've secretly swapped people. They're not walking through the cracks, they're walking through the sea of clouds. Due to this uncertainty, the sect wants us to decide on our own whether we should continue to wait or take the initiative to attack based on the changes in the situation of the 10,000 Buddhas and monks on Shajia's small continent. We'll start a bet and end this prolonged confrontation. Simply put, if they were to challenge the chess game now, it could very well be the normal 6 gambling, 6 against 6. If they continued to wait, when the Buddhists completely gained the upper hand, a variant 6 gambling would appear. 9 against 6, and the Taoists would have 3 more people. In terms of safety, it would definitely be safer to wait. However, this kind of passive method wasn't suitable for the position of the Carefree Mountain sect. Who wouldn't want to use a fairer method to increase their persuasiveness in this kind of competition? Therefore, what the higher-ups of the Carefree Mountain sect meant was that since the Buddhists' power on Shajiao's small continent had been diluted and transferred away, there was no need to maintain the previous strategy of hiding. It was very embarrassing. They hoped that they would take the initiative to attack, but the prerequisite was that the information was accurate. Chapter 8:12. Jiahua was very cautious. Is there a situation where the Buddhists are deliberately mystifying to lure us into a trap? We all know that out of the 10 arhats of the 10,000 Buddhas in Shaka, 6 of them are dragon-subduing arhat and tiger-subduing arhat. We need to confirm that these people have left, or some of them have left. Dragon-subduing arhat and tiger-subduing arhat was a title given by the Buddhists to Jin Dan arhat. It was a difference in the direction of the orthodoxy. Just like in the Taoist orthodoxy, there were many Taoists who didn't specialize in fighting, but were engrossed in the study of Taoism, including alchemy, array, etc. It was the same in the Buddhists. There were many monks who didn't specialize in fighting, but focused on the glory of the Buddhists. This was also the reason why the Buddhists were able to outshine the others. The Buddhists were monks who had a certain level of fighting ability. Of course, there were also many who cultivated both Buddhism and martial arts. Among the Buddhists, the elites were often selected to enter the dragon-subduing pavilion's tiger-subduing hall. It was just a name, and it was specialized in dealing with all kinds of conflicts between the Buddhists and the cultivation world. There weren't many Buddhas in the dragon-subduing pavilion's tiger-subduing hall. They were all around 100 people. For a Buddhist with thousands of arhats, the conditions to be selected were quite harsh. Compared to the Taoists, they were more powerful than the so-called elite disciples of the Taoists. They were similar to the senior brothers of the Taoists. 6, or at least 6 Buddhist disciples, this was a huge pressure. In fact, Xiao Yu's arrangement of forces on Shaji continent was not as good as Xiao Yu's. They only had 3 Taoists at the level of senior brother, including Fan Tong. This kind of strength comparison didn't mean that the Buddhists as a whole were much stronger than the Carefree Wandering sect. It was just that the Carefree Wandering sect had disputes with people on more small continents, so their strength was relatively scattered. In addition, the Carefree Wandering sect's orthodoxy was somewhat carefree, so in terms of organization, it was always difficult to make ends meet. Kawa's worry was the same as almost everyone except for Lu Xi. If they persisted with the original plan, they would almost certainly be able to turn the tables. This was because the Buddhists had no choice but to be outnumbered in the end, so the safety factor was very high. But if they took the initiative to attack, 6 against 6, who would have the confidence to win? Among the 9 upper sects of the Zhou-Xian upper realm, there were only 2 sects of Buddhism. However, it could also be seen that their strength was slightly above that of the free and unfettered travel. But now, for some unknown reason, the higher-ups of the sect had been provoked, and wanted them to take the initiative instead of being passive. This put them in a difficult position. Fan Tong's decision was still neutral. 1 month! I will go with Junior Brothers Wali and Junior Brother Gu Huai to the land controlled by the Buddhist sect to investigate their situation. If the news from the mountain gate is accurate, we should not delay. If the Buddhist sect has a trap for themselves, I will also report it to the mountain gate and continue with our original plan. Everyone unanimously agreed, and it seemed like there was no better way. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head and sighed as he watched this discussion. He was beginning to suspect more and more that the immortal Zhou upper realm as a whole had the ability to do anything to the 5th ring. If the same situation took place in the 5th ring, why would the sect discuss their orders with you? He wouldn't be ambiguous either. Once the manpower was allocated, they could start with a single order. Of course, if the same group of Supreme Jin Dan of the Xianyuan 3 Pure Ones were here, Why would they need to wait for orders from the mountain gate? Their brains would have turned into dog brains long ago. But it was completely different here. It might seem very democratic. The mountain gate only expressed their intention, and they could decide the specific rules themselves. With such a mindset, how could it be possible to dominate the universe? But he would not say anything. This was the cultivation tradition of the free and unfettered travel for hundreds of thousands of years. Not to mention a small Jin Dan like him, even a young god and a half-immortal could not change it. He could not even change the fact that this was another Jin Dan, so what else could he talk about? Moreover, he did not even think that he had the chance to participate in the sixth ring. With the pride of these authentic free and unfettered sect members, 6 out of 10 people would go up to bet on chess. It would never be his turn as an outsider. He would not take the initiative to apply. He would not do anything to offend others. As for Xiaojia Little Lu's eventual return to Taoism? Or Buddhism? It was none of his damn business. But his guess was not very accurate, because after the meeting was adjourned, Fan Tong and the other 2 senior apprentice brothers went to find out, but Jiahua stopped her. This woman must have some roots in Xiaoyao Mountain, so although her strength was not outstanding, everyone was very polite to her, including the 3 senior apprentice brothers. Lu Xiaoyi did not ask, and only listened quietly. Kawa looked into the distance and sighed. Junior brother One-Eared, I heard that you killed a lot of people in the Red Hill Cloud Sea. Although you are all unorthodox rogue cultivators, you should have some ability. Otherwise, Marshal Uncle Zhao would not have sent you here. I have some difficulties here. I wonder if you can help. Lu Xiaoyi was very surprised. This senior sister was a very proud person, and valued the orthodox free and unfettered sect more than anyone else. Now, she was actually asking for his help? But he would never soften his heart just because she was a woman. Please speak, senior sister. I can't promise, but it has to be within my ability. I am just a new free and unfettered sect disciple, my shoulders are very narrow. Kawa was annoyed, and wanted to turn around and leave, but this was not the time to throw a tantrum. It's like this, the tradition of the free and unfettered sect is to follow the will of the people, so the sect rarely forces its disciples to do anything. For example, this time, if senior brother Fan Tong finds out that the other side is secretly cunning, and we continue with our previous strategy of biding our time, then there's nothing to talk about, and we just have to wait for the final 9 against 6. If there's solid evidence that the core of the Buddhist sect has indeed withdrawn from Shaka, then there's nothing to be said. Everyone has done this, and it's not bad to gain some merit in the sect. But I'm afraid that the 3 of them will not come to the same conclusion, and each of them will have their own opinions. Some want to challenge the chessboard of heaven and earth, and some want to stick to the rules. This way, when senior brother Fan Tong chooses people to participate in the battle, there may be people who don't support his opinion and withdraw. In other words, we may not be able to gather 6 people. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. Even the small sects don't have such a ridiculous situation. Kawa interrupted him. Pay attention, you are now a disciple of the free and unfettered sect. Think before you speak. My request is, if senior brother Fan Tong decides to challenge the chessboard of heaven and earth, it would be best if we can gather 6 people. But if we can't, I hope you can step forward bravely. Lu Xiaoyi blinked, and he found that this was a good time to make a request. To an outsider, it would be ridiculous to make a request for fighting for the sect, but since this was the tradition of the free and unfettered sect, why should he make himself so fearless? It had to be in line with his identity, as a disciple of the free and unfettered sect. Chapter 813. Why is senior apprentice sister so sure that senior apprentice brother Fan will support the challenge? From what I see, with senior apprentice brother's temper, it's most likely that he'll choose to be stable, right? Lu Xiaoyi beat around the bush. He couldn't be too obvious about the benefits he wanted. Kawa didn't hesitate. Yes, you're right. Senior apprentice brother Fan indeed has this kind of temper. If it was a Taoist master who sent the message, he would definitely choose to be mature and prudent. But the one who sent the message is his master. What do you think he'll choose? Lu Xiaoyi suddenly understood. Then, senior apprentice sister's master is also in the same faction as them? Ka Hua frowned. She didn't want to answer this kind of question, but she chose to ask for help. It's not master! But it's more or less the same, so I'll support senior apprentice brother Fan's decision. Lu Xiaoyi continued. Then, the faction behind Gu Huai and the others is different. Okay, I won't talk about this. I know senior apprentice sister doesn't like to hear it. I'm a straightforward person, and I don't want to be hypocritical. I also have a condition. Ka Hua stared at him. Say it. Lu Xiaoyi said slowly. I'm a newly affiliated disciple. My previous orthodoxy was the Seven Colors Sword sect of the Seven Colors continent. Ever since I came to Carefree, I've been homesick, but due to the sect's rules, I can't act without permission. If I help senior apprentice sister, can senior apprentice sister help me do some work and send me on a mission from the Seven Colors continent? Ka Hua let out a sigh of relief. She thought that this guy would ask for an exorbitant price. After leaving for decades without returning, it was normal for him to miss his hometown and old friends. There was nothing strange about it. It would be strange if he didn't miss it. In Carefree Travel, there was indeed such a requirement for newly affiliated disciples. But it wasn't like there was no room for flexibility. For example, if an elder believed that this person had completely converted, or if there was a special mission, it could be manipulated. To Lu Xiaoyi, this was a very correct thing to do. To the higher-ups, it was just a sentence. Okay, I can help you do it. I won't be blamed for secretly returning to the Seven Colors continent. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. It's a deal. He didn't care about Lu Bo's battle. On the contrary, he was looking forward to it because he had very little experience in dealing with Buddhist disciples. When he was at the Fifth Ring, he didn't have any monks. Qin Kong did, but he didn't have the time to flirt with him. For a swordsman who viewed battle as cultivation, he longed to fight with any type of cultivator and firmly believed that he would obtain the final victory. However, he couldn't take the initiative to ask for it. That would put him at a disadvantage. It would be best if someone else asked for it. Then, even if he was unwilling, he would reluctantly accept it. The reason why he wanted to return to the Seven Colors continent was not that he was looking for trouble. It was also not because the Red Earth Merchant Guild might retaliate against the original orthodoxy of his identity. Thinking about it, they were all orthodoxies. What right did Red Earth have to say that it dared to retaliate against the orthodoxy of another continent? The reason why he wanted to make this trip was because of his personality. In this aspect, he and Qing Xian had something in common. After the meeting at Taixuan, both of them had discussed this problem and had the idea to solve their origins. They couldn't always be so passive and hope that they would be lucky not to bump into acquaintances. That was not their personality. They were both aggressive people. When there was trouble, they would think about how to solve it, not how to avoid it. He needed to find a reason. The threat of the Red Earth Merchant Guild gave him a reason to do so. As for what to do when he really reached the Seven Colors continent, there would be a way. Moreover, he and Qin Xian both privately thought that from a human perspective, it was normal for them to do so. They weren't honest people who didn't return for hundreds of years. If they were so honest, they wouldn't have committed a capital crime. A month later, everyone gathered at Baiyun Tao's temple again. The thing that Ka Hua was worried about happened. Two senior brothers, Fan Tong and Zhuo Li, thought that the Buddhist sect had indeed rotated the guarding Arhat. Out of the 6 dragon and tiger Arhats, 4 had left. They should no longer be afraid of the slightest thing. Instead, they should take the initiative to attack and not embarrass Xiaoyao Yu. Under such circumstances, they were still clinging to the idea of defending and counterattacking. Gu Huai's objection was also very firm. In front of the gains and losses of the continent, what is the so-called reputation? There is clearly the safest way to protect the continent, but you want to be reckless and impulsive. I don't know where the logic lies. The reason why the Mountain Gate wants us to make the decision instead of directly ordering us to challenge them is because they respect our understanding of the 1,000 Buddha monks over the years. Finally, I want to remind you that if the sixth gamble fails, do you think the Mountain Gate will take responsibility? No, they will say that the initiative has always been in your hands. This is a continent, not a spiritual weapon. It is lost forever, and there is no chance to get it back. Fan Tong was still trying his best. But there is one thing that we have investigated very clearly. Out of the 6 dragon and tiger arhats, 4 have left. We have been in Shaga for so many years, how could we be wrong? Gu Huai did not give in. Senior brother Fan is right. But what level are the 4 new arhats at? Who knows? What if it is a smokescreen, using the dragon and tiger arhats of other continents to exchange for Shagas? They are luring us to challenge them now, so that they will not be at a disadvantage in the end. Zwali supported Fan Tong. Impossible. There are 4 new dragon and tiger arhats. I found a chance to test one of them. He is just an ordinary arhat monk. There is nothing special about him. Gu Huai did not give in. First, you have to test all 4 new arhats before you can make a conclusion. Second, how do you know that he is not deliberately hiding his strength? Zwali's eyebrows were like knives. Test everyone? Then why not just tell them that we are ready to attack? As for hiding his strength, I, Zwali, have tested him. He can hide his strength. There is no perfect plan in this world, and there is no certain victory. If you don't take the risk, then you don't have to do anything. Just go back to the Mountain Gate and retire. I am a dignified Shaoyao orthodoxy, with the same status as the 10,000 Buddhas. But here I am, overcautious and afraid of this and that. I don't know what I am afraid of. Some people have brought the grudges of the Mountain Gate's internal factions into official business, using this as a pretext to stir up trouble. I will report this to the Mountain Gate. Gu Huai was also angry. It was true that he did not get along with Fan Tong's group, but it was also true that he suspected the monks of cheating. It was not entirely due to selfish motives. You can report it as you wish. I, Gu Huai, am not afraid of slanted shadows. I am also telling you that I do not agree to this challenge. I will not participate in it, and I will not be responsible for your reckless actions. Fan Tong sighed in his heart. Things had come to this point by accident, but it was also inevitable. To be honest, if he ignored all external factors and only acted based on intuition, he would probably choose to continue to endure, just like Gu Huai. This was a character and also a judgment. But the order was given by his master. He was also very clear that the faction represented by his master was at a critical moment in the upper level of the Shaoyao orthodoxy. They needed him to open up the situation in Shaka, and not dawdle here. There was no other way. Life was unpredictable, and there was no choice. Then, let's vote. Chapter 8:14. In such a small occasion, there was no need to go through so much trouble. All they had to do was to stand behind their fellow disciples. It was simple and clear. There was no neutrality either. Being neutral in such an occasion meant offending everyone. Very quickly, there were 5 people standing behind Fan Tong, and 4 behind Gu Huai. These free and unfettered disciples from the mainland had already decided on their own faction after joining the Free and Unfettered Wandering Guild. There was no way to avoid this. The only uncertain one was the new disciple, Single Ear. Perhaps he was in his own faction. Gu Huai stared at him and said word by word, "Brother Single Ear, please choose carefully." Was this a threat? Lu Xiaoyi hated being threatened the most. In fact, among the 10 of them, who belonged to which faction was like a fly on a bald man's head. It was obvious. If you want me to join your group and support you, sure, we can talk about it. Everyone put out their conditions. A fine bird chooses a tree to nest in. A bird waits for the best price. It's simple. You don't even give a hair. You think you can solve the problem by threatening people? You're not right. There's no basis for cooperation. Naturally, he stood behind Fantong. Inside, he found it funny that Rice Bucket's partner was an idiot. 6 against 4. The Xiaoyao sect had made a difficult choice. Perhaps it was also an unwise choice. Coldly glancing at Lu Xiaoyi, Gu Huai said, I will report this to the sect. If you win the bet, it has nothing to do with me. I will return to the sect and accept my punishment. If you lose, I will not be responsible for Shaka's loss. The 4 of them left together. Fantong looked at Lu Xiaoyi and thanked him. I heard from Sister Ka Hua. Thank you for your support. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. It's just an exchange. You're too serious. Fantong was serious. An exchange depends on the person. If Gu Huai came to make a deal with you, would you agree? Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. Probably not. Brother Gu's aura is too sharp. I'm not used to it. Fantong smiled knowingly and gathered everyone into a group. 6 people. Let me introduce you, Junior One-Aired. Regardless of whether we succeed this time or not, we'll be on the same side in the future. Please take good care of us. Everyone saw each other again. This was a true meeting, different from the perfunctory greetings of the past. Fantong's tone turned serious. We're all on the same side, so I won't be hypocritical. Now that we're compared to the Buddhists, we only have a 50-50 chance of winning if it's the normal 6 gambling. Therefore, Gu Huai's words are not without reason. However, different positions lead to different choices. There's no such thing as good or bad, right or wrong. In the cultivation world, there's no such thing as pure reason. If you want to get it, you need to take risks. We took the risk in advance, while they took the risk later. Everyone has something to rely on. Before the results are out, who can say for sure? Everyone nodded their heads. They were all Jin Dan people with strong wills, and they were very clear about their own choices. Fantong continued. Among the 6 of us, Junior Jia is the best at the 6 gambling. Moreover, the 6 gambling is largely determined by the heavens. If I say that among us, no one has better luck than Junior Jia, I'm sure no one would deny it, right? Other than Lu Xiaoyi, everyone else laughed, because in the mountain gate, the Marshall brothers and sisters played the 6 chess. Jiahua was an expert. Not only was her calculation profound, her luck had always been very good. She was always able to get the pieces she needed. Fantong decided. Then, the king's son will be Junior Ka Hua. I'll be the prime minister, Zwili will be the chariot, Kong Gu will be the horse, Yu Lu and Wonard will be the pawn. If anyone has any objections, why don't you voice them out so we can discuss them? No one had any objections. The arrangement was fair. Fantong was the strongest, blocking the king's path. Zwili was the second strongest, turning into the chariot, rushing back and forth. Lu Xiaoyi sighed inwardly. Another pawn! In the chessboard of heaven and earth, this position seemed to be fated with him. It had been following him like a ghost. Actually, he felt that he could also be the king if he only depended on luck. But it was just a thought. Fantong cheered. If the Buddhists didn't move, with their 6 Longhu disciples, we would be at a disadvantage no matter if it was the 6 cards or the variant 6 cards. It's hard to say whether we can win. But since they've been moved, we have a chance of winning. If Gu Huai was here, our chance of winning would be above 70%. Unfortunately, we're trapped in the internal strife, but even now, the Buddhists are evenly matched with us. As long as we work together, victory is in sight. Not only will we keep Shaka for the sect, but we'll also have the upper hand in the internal strife. This is a heavy responsibility. We can't ignore it. The plan was set. There was no more hesitation. Delay could lead to changes, and changes could be the cause of defeat. Fantong lit the incense of heaven and earth. A wisp of smoke rose into the clouds. This was the ceremony to make a request. All that was left was to wait. Lu Xiaoyi still had some questions. He walked up to Ka Hua and smiled mischievously. Your Highness, I still have some things I don't understand. Please give me some pointers. Ka Hua said helplessly. Say it. You can't calm down before the battle. Instead, you have so many questions. I don't know how you cultivated your gene, Dan. Lu Xiao laughed. We are unorthodox loose cultivators. We can fight to the death anytime, anywhere. What do we need to prepare for? We just have to fight. Junior brother, I just want to know a few questions. Is the battle between the 6 cards decided by life and death? Are the moves of the chess pieces completely decided by the king? Or can the chess pieces be self-determined to a certain extent? What's the difference between attacking and defending? Does the attacking side have some kind of advantage? How is the battle space defined? Is one side trapped? Or can it be moved around the chessboard? How is victory determined? Are all the chess pieces destroyed? Or is the queen tricked? If my pawn crosses the river, can he still come back? Kawa sighed. This was the trouble of cultivators from unorthodox sections. They didn't know much about the heaven and earth chessboard. They just had to read about it from the ancient records. Hence, there were all kinds of people passing off fish eyes as pearls. This is the 6 cards, not Chinese chess. The rules are different. Let me tell you now. You have to listen carefully. If you really lose your life in there, I won't have to spend any more effort to arrange the rainbow team for you. The heaven and earth chessboard has always been a game of life and death. For a land battle like ours, it's not a battle of orthodoxy between the 10,000 Buddhas and the carefree chessboard. Hence, it's not a game of death. It's a game of life. In other words, if you're injured and can't hold on, you can withdraw yourself. This is allowed by the rules. It's the same as being eaten. Lu Xiao heaved a long sigh. Good. 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 The game of life is good. Everyone, don't be so nervous. Kawa glared at him. One ear, I'm warning you. If you don't put in any effort and pretend to be injured and leave, everyone's eyes are clear. You can't hide it from them. Although my carefree chessboard doesn't have many rules and is tolerant of the disciples, we can't tolerate such shameless people. If you do this, no matter if you win or lose, you won't be able to escape the sect's punishment. Moreover, the agreement between you and me is no longer valid. You have to be clear about this. Chapter 8:15. Lu Xiao laughed dryly. How can that be? Kawa continued to explain. The battle space is around the chess pieces, how can you run around? However, the heaven and earth chessboard is unpredictable, and the space it provides can satisfy the needs of swordsmen like you, so you don't have to worry. As for the difference between attacking and defending pieces, it's only in the first move. This is the same as Chinese chess. As for how the chess pieces move, it's up to the king to decide. If it's up to you, won't you just go around your opponent? Victory or defeat, of course, depends on whether the king is the king or not. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a chess game, but an arena. How can you judge the king's overall plan? Lastly, I have to talk about you, the pawn. In all chess games except for Go, the pawn's characteristics have never changed. It can only move forward, not backward, until it sinks to the bottom. This is the essence of all chess games in the world. Lu Xiao sighed. I've heard that there's a type of forward that moves backwards, and a type of retreat that moves forwards. Kawa glared at him. The prerequisite is that you have to get rid of the status of a pawn. Lu Xiao suddenly had an idea. Can I surrender and betray the king? Kawa ignored him. You can try. Time passed slowly as they waited. This was the difference between the Jin Dan and the perfected cultivators. One had to wait for the order, while the other had to be arranged first. However, in the process of waiting, the members were not allowed to change. In other words, if the myriad Buddhist sect transferred people from other places, it would not be recognized. In the Xiaoyao school, there were 5 people who were silently preparing. A majestic and fearless aura rippled among them, except for Lu Xiao. He continued to cultivate when he should, drink when he should, eat when he should, eat when he should, and continue to eat when he should. It was as if the 6th round had nothing to do with him, which made everyone shake their heads. Fan Tong sighed and told Kawa, Junior sister, these foreign cultivators are not as reliable as our sect. They haven't completely treated the Xiaoyao sect as their sect, so they're not essential. They're just treating this as an ordinary battle, and might not be willing to give their all. Junior sister, you have to think more about this in your chess arrangements. You can't give too much responsibility. Kawa nodded bitterly. Got it. Too bad it's not Chinese chess. Otherwise, he would be the best cannon fodder. The 6 boards of chess is determined by the heavens. I hope everything goes smoothly. On the morning of the 3rd day, while Lu Xue was eating buns, he saw the clouds in the sky suddenly ripple. There was a strange light inside, as if there was a voice calling out to him. He knew that the match was about to begin. Life and death were small matters, but the steamed buns were big matters. Lu Xiaoyi continued to destroy the remaining food. It was a good habit to not waste food. After finishing his meal, he walked to a secluded area before rising into the sky. Passing through the clouds, he approached the mystical light. Then, he felt as if he had arrived in another dimension. Amidst the clouds, the morning sun shone brightly. Above the sea of clouds, a gigantic chessboard had been formed. Before the chessboard approached, a murderous aura was faintly felt. The red and black sides were in their respective positions. 11 monks and Taoists waited in formation. Before they could take a closer look, Kawa's slightly angry voice rang in their ears. Still not in position? Are the buns that delicious? When you die, I'll ask Chao Ji to serve you a tray of buns in front of your grave. Lu Xiaoyi was thick-skinned. He bowed and said, Sorry for the long wait. The road to the underworld is long. It's better to die with a full stomach. There was no need to find a position, because there was only one position left on the chessboard. The right pawn position of the black chess piece. Horse, king, rook, red pawn, phase, pawn, black, horse, king, rook. The 2 formations faced each other, and the flags were fluttering. However, there was one point. The red side's momentum was obviously stronger. It was not because of the cultivators, but because of the battle formation itself. As soon as Lu Xiaoyi stood on the pawn position, he understood where the difference in aura came from. It was the power of faith from Shaka Little Land, because the foundation of Buddhism's faith was more solid. This was the magic of the chessboard of heaven and earth. If it was a situation where the Buddhists had the complete advantage, the Taoists would naturally have the momentum of a morning army. This was also a strategy that matched the balance of the upper realm's orthodoxy of Zhou Xian as much as possible. It was biased towards the weaker side. However, since the Taoists took the initiative to start the game this time, and the situation had not completely collapsed, then it would show its true form. Both sides had 6 chess pieces, and the momentum of the Buddhists was dominant. This was actually one of the reasons why Gu Huai and the others were unwilling to come. The battle became more and more intense. The flags behind each chess piece fluttered loudly. The king's flag was loud, and the carriage and horses were loud. The sound of the little black pawn's flag was covered by it, and it made an inaudible sound. This made Lu Xiaoyi very unhappy. There was a difference in treatment again. There was something wrong with the chessboard of heaven and earth. It did not respect Xiu Quan. Zhongming suddenly sounded in the sky. This was the cue to start the game. At the same time, 6 jade chopsticks descended and suspended in the sky above the Chu River and Han boundary. According to the rules, since it was the black side's challenge, the red side should go first. The red side's prince was bald. He chanted the name of Buddha and pointed at the Chu River and Han boundary. Suddenly, the 6 jade chopsticks spun around in the limited space. Immediately, one of them fell out, and there was a huge word horse on it. The red horse's flag let out a warhorse's neigh. Immediately, the red horse took a step forward. The battle momentum was high, but there was an uncoordinated sound. Don't mess with the horse's leg! The black side's prince, Kawa, shouted sternly. Single ear! Stop being noisy! This isn't Chinese chess. There's no such thing as messing with the horse's leg. If you continue to spout nonsense, no one will care about you. You'll be left to fend for yourself. Lu Xiaoyi was resentful. This kind of chess game was far inferior to the white-browed old man's game in terms of momentum. The prince's ability to restrain him was also limited, so he could still spout nonsense. There was no horse's leg. The elephant's eye probably didn't exist. The chessboard was spacious. Maybe there was no rule that the king didn't meet the king. He just didn't know if the pawn had short legs and could only move one step at a time? After the red piece passed, it was the black piece's turn. Kawa also pointed in the direction of the jade chopsticks. After the 6 jade chopsticks trembled for a while, one chopstick also fell out. It was the word Xiang. But Kawa didn't mess with the word Xiang. She chose to give up. This was the rule of the 6th gambling. Which piece to move was determined by the heavens. But whether to move or not, and how to move, was controlled by humans. This was a chess game that fully combined the will of heaven, humans, and strength. It was full of variables. Next, both sides mobilized their pieces and quickly formed a confrontation on the left side. They were about to enter a dangerous killing trap. Lu Xiaoyi felt bored. The black side shook the chopsticks a total of 7 times, but didn't get the right black pawn once. Unlike the white-browed old man who had rushed in front, this time he was completely sitting on the wall and watching. The left side was fiercely arranged, but the right side was empty. Could it be that the queen had been killed, and he was still here? Could he be blamed? Would Kawa's promise still exist? He shook his head and sighed. The bald king against the queen, set up a red and black light. Watch me as the pawn crosses the river, its mouth wide open. Chapter 8:16. In the first battle, the free and unfettered disciples felt as if they had fallen into an ice cave. The red pawn crossed the river. This was the sign of the final battle. For a master of the 6th gambling like Kawa, this was nothing new. She did not want to let the opponent's already high morale rise to another level. As a master of the 6th gambling who was used to defending and counterattacking, she used a move, flying phase stomping pawn. And it was a nun. Female red pawn. Black phase was Fan Tong, and also the strongest on their side. She wanted to use this method to tell the opponent that the free and unfettered sect was not to be trifled with. The key was that Yuzong's move was also very interesting. It just so happened that it was Black Phase's turn. In this game of chess, the will of heaven and man had overlapped. In the understanding of cultivators, this move was inevitable. An inevitable victory. Because the will of heaven and man resonated. Fan Tong controlled a tricolored auspicious cloud to suppress the red pawn. This was the trilight technique of the free and unfettered technique. The attack was sharp and unpredictable, and it was the foundation of speed techniques. Those who did not know Fan Tong's background would think that his technique must be compatible with his temperament, and that he walked the traditional path of stability. However, Kawa, who knew him well, knew that in the heart of this usually gentle senior brother, there was a restless heart, which would only be revealed in a real battle. Black Phase entered the red pawn's space. Because of the rules, once the trilight technique gained the upper hand, it was very difficult for the opponent to struggle out of it. This was a type of spell that became more and more intense, displaying the free and unfettered sex free and unfettered mind. The biggest characteristic of their battle was that they let go of their mind and indulged themselves. It was somewhat different from the orthodox and serious Taoist sex inheritance. Then, a world rose from the red pawn's space, the Prajna world. The Buddhist kingdom in the heart. Among the Buddhist disciples, there were not many who could do this in the Jing Dan stage. Just based on this move, this unfamiliar red pawn should have the ability of Dragon Tiger Arhat. But the free and unfettered sect knew nothing about this. The Prajna world was one of the most profound realms among the many Buddhist worlds. It was a bit similar to the Taoist's enchantment, but it was more profound and involved than the Taoist's enchantment. This was because the enchantment was just one of the Taoist's battle methods, while the Buddhist world was a world built by the monks with their own cognition. It contained their ideals, spirit, and beliefs. The tripartite light technique galloped unhindered in the great wisdom world, but it just couldn't deliver the final blow. The black chariot slowly transmitted his divine sense to Queen Kawa. Junior sister! There was something fishy about this Hongzhu. He might not be Lenghu Arhat, but he might be a preacher. Kawa bitterly nodded. Sutra preachers referred to those monks who focused on preaching the Buddhist scriptures. They were geniuses who naturally comprehended some profound Buddhist principles during the long period of preaching. Once these monks came into contact with combat, their strength would be above Lenghu Arhats. Of course, there were also monks who had been fighting all their lives who suddenly had an epiphany at a certain stage. In the end, they changed their profession and became Buddhist monks. No matter which one it was, because they had undergone a metamorphosis in the field they came into contact with, they were all outstanding people in the new field. They were the exemplary examples of comprehending by analogy. But this also meant that Thousand Buddha's imperial light didn't give up on the fight for Shaka. They had indeed changed people, but the one who replaced them wasn't an ordinary monk, but an even more powerful preacher. The tripartite light technique's performance in the Prajna world was getting worse and worse. This was the disadvantage of speed. When the goal couldn't be achieved, the defeat would be even faster. Admit defeat! Admit defeat! It's 2 against 1. It's not shameful to admit defeat. Another discordant voice appeared, and it was still that singular person. This time, it wasn't Kawa who reprimanded, but a monk. It's obviously a 1 against 1 battle. How is it bullying with numbers? Mongrel Taoist, don't slander us. The troublemaker's voice was very unconvinced. Isn't that sister-in-law pregnant? Isn't it 2 against 1? Even if you want to fight to the Buddha, I'll accompany you. Thousand Buddha's imperial light technique's momentum was suppressed a little. After all, whether she was pregnant or not was not a secret. Of course, whether it was 2 against 1 or not was another matter. After all, if it was so, it could be said that tens of millions of male cultivators were fighting against 2. Kawa had nothing to say. This singular person was really a rascal. No privacy could escape from his stinky mouth. Buddhism didn't forbid marriage. But the noise outside couldn't change the course of the battle. Fan Tong's disadvantage was gradually increasing as time went by. He wanted to fight back but lacked strength. The Prajna world was like a cage, tightly binding him. In such a fixed mode of battle, both sides couldn't choose to leave the battle space to start again, which had a very real impact on the cultivators. In other places, in any open space, Fan Tong might not be defeated so quickly. At least, he still had room to struggle. But now he was in the chessboard world, in the fixed battle space of Hongzhu. When his explosive power was not enough to break the opponent's blockade, he could only sink into it. Kawa had to keep her eyes open because in the 6 gambling game, the life and death of the chess pieces were not only determined by the cultivators themselves, but also by the princes like her. In a battle between cultivators, life and death were not rare in an instant. Many times, cultivators in the battle might not have time to react to their defeat in time. This was a technical problem, but also a psychological problem. Cultivators were also human, they also wanted to save face and hoped for miracles. When cultivators in the battle couldn't make a reasonable judgment due to various complicated situations, they needed the help of their princes to stop and withdraw from the chessboard space to save their lives. In the history of chess games, more than 80% of the cultivators who admitted defeat and left were stopped by their princes, not themselves. This was the responsibility of the princes. In this way, at least the losers could have dignity. When they recalled this history in the future, they would regretfully say, "Oh, I was not as good as others, so I was stopped by my prince." What should they say on the other hand? Would they say, "I knew I couldn't win, so I ran away"? Not delaying the possibility of a comeback, and not endangering the lives of their chess pieces, this required a cultivator's eyesight. This was the biggest problem Kawa was facing now. Jiahua's advantage was that she was very clear about her companion's abilities after getting along with them day and night. She was also very clear that although the Buddhist skills were very slow, like being sealed and boiling a frog in warm water, when the situation was really under control, the Vajra's glare and the Buddha's roar would strike very quickly. It was not as forgiving as they appeared to be on the surface. A moment later, without any warning, Kawa made a request to admit defeat to the chessboard of heaven and earth. At the same time, Fan Tong was removed from the chessboard of heaven and earth. Zwili gave his junior sister a thumbs up. Zwili was very clear that a good prince could allow the chess pieces below to participate in the battle without worrying about whether they would be able to withdraw in time. From this point of view, Jiahua was responsible. She did it! Chapter 8:17. Fan Tong fell out of the chessboard space, his whole body weak. He had been on the brink of death. Being in the Prajna space, he knew that the girl had been preparing for the final attack. He couldn't stop her, but he didn't want to admit defeat. Gu Huai and the other three looked at him, gloating. At least you chose the right prince! Gu Huai mocked. Fan Tong's expression didn't change. This is just the beginning! Gu Huai sneered. Although this is just the beginning, I can already see the result. Senior brother Fan, 1,000 Buddhas has already sent out their preacher. Even if it's just one, do you think we still have a chance? Don't deceive yourself. Prepare to face the sex punishment. Fan Tong was speechless. Although Gu Huai was annoying, he was right. There was no chance. This was a trap set by 1,000 Buddhas. What he was trying to catch was their reckless and lucky mentality. The game continued. For the carefree cultivators, the situation continued to deteriorate. Lu Xiaoyi, the right black pawn, continued to do nothing. This made him very depressed. The way of heaven always gave him extreme treatment. Last time, he was used to death. This time, it was the opposite. Did he swallow too much fate? Lu Xiaoyi wasn't the only one who was depressed. Queen Kawa was as well. When there was a clear disparity between the strength of the two sides in a chess game, whether or not the chess game was played would not be that important. What she could decide was to let her pawns be in a state of eating, not being eaten. This would give her pawns a good start to the battle, and let them choose the most suitable opening for themselves. This was the right given to her by the chessboard. It was very important in a battle between cultivators, but the prerequisite was that the two sides were similar in strength. She tried her best to move her pawns, but sadly found that the will of heaven was not on her side. This was the momentum. When she couldn't win the first battle even though she combined the will of heaven and the will of heaven, the momentum left her. It left the carefree cultivators. She finally understood that even if it was the chessboard of heaven and earth, she still had to follow the iron law of the cultivation world. Strength was the absolute truth. She had the experience of playing chess, but she didn't have the right pawns. It was that simple. The free and unfettered cultivators were knocked out of the game one by one. The only thing Kawa could do now was to try her best to keep them alive. After losing the chess game, the free and unfettered forces withdrew from Shaji Little Continent. This was not a small mistake, and all the free and unfettered cultivators who participated in this mistake were able to stay out of it. This kind of result would cause people to gossip, because you didn't even show the integrity that you should have. So much so that no one even fought to the death in this failure. But she still did it. She still maintained the safety of her fellow disciples. She would rather bear the blame for her incompetence in the chess competition. Because she felt that since the decision was made by the few of them, the responsibility should naturally be borne by her. She had never been a person who shirked responsibility. Even if he lost and let down the sect, he had to be worthy of the trust of his companions. Even if it was the one ear who was talking nonsense and spouting nonsense, she would not watch him lose his life. Up until now, apart from Zwili's victory over the red horse, the carefree cultivator had gained nothing else. 2 hours later, the red side of 1FO lacked horses, and the black side only had 1 king and 1 pawn left. With such a gap, no one could turn the tables. One Ear was still blabbering on and on about his rotten ideas. Protest. Request for arbitration. This group of baldies collectively took stimulants. Request for a rematch. Kawa didn't even have the mood to scold him. In the cultivation world, it's not against the rules to use great medicine to assist in battle, Lu Xiaoyi said shamelessly. Then request for 2 out of 3, 3 out of 5. Or sue them for changing the players at the last minute and trampling on the rules. Or delay the game and not move. Kawa couldn't bear it anymore. One Ear! Shut up! It's not that the free and unfettered cultivators can't afford to lose. If you continue to be unreasonable, I'll satisfy your request and let you fight to the death with them to fulfill your wish. Lu Xiaoyi cracked a smile. He had been waiting for this sentence. Yes, I'm here. Then just admit defeat. Why are you still dawdling? Could it be that you're still waiting for a decent opportunity? I don't think those monks have this intention. Kawa realized that her anger towards failure was not as strong as her hatred towards this scoundrel. Perhaps, the biggest failure of this bet was bringing this fellow along with them. Of course they won't give you any face. But not to me, but to that stinky mouth of yours. If they don't teach you a lesson, they won't easily withdraw their troops. And I see that you also seem to be angry? Lu Xiaoyi laughed dryly. I'm not angry? No, I'm not that angry. Admit defeat, let's make them unable to vent their anger, isn't that good? Kawa refused. Although I'm a woman, I don't have the habit of admitting defeat. You can admit defeat, this is my special permission. I won't ask my companions to bear the responsibility that they can't bear. I know that your stinky mouth is just to disgust the other party. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. Senior sister, what you're doing is not right. You're a woman and don't have the habit of admitting defeat, but do I have the habit of admitting defeat as a man? You want to fulfill your Tao heart, but make me lose my sword heart? That's not appropriate, is it? Kawa felt that she was about to be driven crazy. This won't do, that won't do, fighting won't do, running won't do, what do you want? Lu Xiaoyi felt that she was very boring. Senior sister, I think that rather than you being defeated by them and then us being defeated, it's better not to give them the chance. Anyway, it doesn't matter to me. They're closer to you, so they won't come for me. Kawa looked at him strangely. One Ear! You probably haven't figured out the rules of the 6 boards of chess? I have the Royal City Shield, so they can't hit me. If they want to hit me, they need to fulfill a condition. Lu Xiaoyi was dumbfounded. What condition? We've already lost everyone, what other conditions can there be? Kawa finally vented her anger. The rules of the 6 boards state that before entering the royal city and attacking the other party's prince, we must first eliminate all the other party's pawns. What do you think of this rule? Doesn't it make a lot of sense? Lu Xiaoyi finally understood. Who the hell set this rule? So if they want to hit you, they have to hit me first? Then can't you come out of the royal city for a few rounds? Kawa felt a little better. She was very curious about her current state. Her hatred for Buddhism did not even make her feel better than seeing this guy suffer. I can't go out. This is also a rule. Just like Chinese chess. So, you can either admit defeat or get beaten up. I can only express my moral support for you. Lu Xiaoyi said anxiously. You can still make me run. You can't just wait here and get beaten up, right? Quick, let's quickly sink to the bottom. Kawa was calm and unruffled. Sorry, I can't move you because I can't shake you with the chopsticks. What can I do? Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. I'm the only one left, and you still want me to shake the 6 chopsticks? This rule is too inhumane. Jiahua smiled. No, it's precisely because it has to be humane and fit reality that there are such rules. Think about it, since ancient times, how many heroes have reached a dead end? They would rather die in a battle for their faith, for their loyalty, for their perseverance, and for their perseverance, dying together with the city? So, the reality is that there will always be a reason why you can't leave. Lu Xiaoyi cried out in grievance. I have no faith, and I'm not loyal. Chapter 8:18. Outside the chessboard, the 8 free and unfettered cultivators faced each other in 4 groups. At least we have the courage to fight, but you don't even have the guts to face us, a cultivator on Fan Tong's side said hatefully. If you really have the courage, then fight to the death. Even if it's just one of you. You're all alive and kicking now. What courage do you have to talk to us about? True courage is knowing how to endure and bear the consequences of infamy. It's not rashly rushing up to put on a show and then being beaten down. Gu Huai's cultivator's mouth was very sharp. Junior sister Ka Hua is very benevolent. She actually let all of you retreat safely. Gu Huai joked. Fan Tong replied, It's my request. I'll bear the responsibility. You don't have to be sarcastic here and sow discord. Me too, Zwili said without hesitation. Gu Huai chuckled. Stubbornness. They'll suffer later. He didn't think he did anything wrong. The most important thing to be in charge of the Continental War was to control the situation. If he couldn't do that, what was the point of talking about other things? He hated Fan Tong's faction for this. They seemed to be loyal and righteous, and considered themselves to be orthodox, but in fact, they were conservative and old-fashioned. The free and unfettered travel was such a good foundation, but after so many years, they had been played like this. They lost everything and still didn't know it. This was the difference between the old and new sections. Their only hope was that with the development of the cultivation world, there would be more and more new cultivators like them. They would go out, see more, and put practical benefits first. This was the direction of the cultivation world in the future. Ka Hua pointed at the jade chopsticks in the air above the Chu River and Han boundary. The chopsticks spun around and spun around. She smiled and said, Look. It's not that I don't want to help you, it's that even the heavens don't want to help you. I've thrown the chopsticks dozens of times today, but you've never been thrown out. Tell me, is it because even the heavens despise you for your foul mouth? Seeing the monks approaching, Lu Xiaoyi curled his lips. Maybe it's because your hands are foul. I say, senior sister Jia, when the fight starts, you can't use your power to avenge private grudges and push me into the fire pit. If you see that I'm not in a good position, admit defeat for me. Don't drag it out, it's very dangerous. Ka Hua's mood had become very relaxed. There was nothing to fight for. The outcome had been decided. Now, the fun was to teach this guy a lesson. If it wasn't dangerous, would it have forced out your potential? I've heard that you're very impressive in Red Hill. You're challenging a group of people by yourself? Why don't you show your power and prestige to your senior sister? Lu Xiaoyi was very pleased with himself. It's all in the past. It's not worth mentioning, not worth mentioning. They were all unorthodox itinerant cultivators. For them to be reduced to working as hired thugs for the Chamber of Commerce, their strength was evident. Senior sister, you can't favor one over the other. You've already sent them away, so don't leave me here alone. When I come back, people will talk. Carefree Wanderer came to our sect, but he actually let a foreign cultivator fight to the death in a battle. Hee, it won't be nice to hear. Ka Hua was a little speechless. He was obviously a coward, but what he said made sense. He was also a freak. He continued to throw chopsticks. He threw out everything except for the right pawn. Even she sighed at how this guy was a jinx. The monk's chess pieces were getting closer and closer. The red chariot was already in the attack path, waiting to be thrown to the red chariot's jade. Lu Xiaoyi was still there, asking for benefits. Senior sister, I know that you have a deep foundation in the sect and have a strong backer. Seeing that I, your junior brother, have persevered until the end, can you help me get a carefree mask? The carefree mask was the work of a former carefree great cultivator. He liked to play around and meddle in affairs. Unfortunately, his subordinates were incomparably tough. He was a rare great cultivator in the history of the Carefree Wanderer who was famous for his fighting strength. When he traveled in the human world, he liked to wear a mask, not wanting to stay in the human world. This was a story from tens of thousands of years ago. This great cultivator had long passed away, but the rules of his mask had been passed down in the carefree wanderer. Thus, there were countless legends about the carefree mask. To this day, the carefree mask had become a symbol of status. It represented the core group of disciples in the carefree wanderer. Cultivators who had not reached a certain level of strength and status could not wear it. In the current carefree Jean Dan group, there were no more than 10 people who were qualified to wear a mask when they traveled outside. Just like the wanderer monk of the 10,000 Buddhas facing the heavens, the Mang boots of the Great Mystery Middle Yellow, the Tian Guan of the Qing Wei Immortal Sect, the Thorn monk of the Bitter Zen Temple, the Abstinence monk of the Huangting Taoism, the Life Seed of the Wanyan Creation, the Ox Rider of the Yuanshe Cave, and the Tattooed Head of the Human Sect. They were all the top cultivators of the upper sects. They were the eldest senior brothers of their level and represented extraordinary power. They had a special status and ability. Kawa's eyes widened. One ear, you really dare to dream. There are less than 10 carefree masks in the Jean Dan group. You, a new disciple from outside, dare to covet it. Do you know that senior brother Fan Tong applied for it for 100 years and still didn't get it? I have some connections in the Mountain Gate, but I can't set such a bad precedent. Are you scared out of your wits? What do you mean by persevering until the end? You're only able to persevere until now because the heavenly Tao doesn't like you. Otherwise, you would have been kicked down to eat your buns long ago. Fan Tong applied for it for 100 years? With his strength, it would be useless even if he applied for another 100 years. How could he compare to the great swordsman Lu? Senior sister, heroes don't matter where they come from. Outstanding people should think about their reasons. You can't be indiscriminate. Aren't I preparing for Shajia? I'm just waiting for an opportunity to go back to the 7-colored little land to visit my family. There are rules in the Mountain Gate. People like us shouldn't go back with great fanfare. It's easy to leave a bad impression in the Mountain Gate and cause trouble for you, isn't it? It's better to wear a mask. It doesn't violate the Mountain Gate's rules and save everyone's face. I can also show off in front of the old master's family and friends. I can't travel in the daytime in luxurious clothes. I can at least wear a mask. In the process of the chess game, the red side's chess pieces were almost finished. The rook rode, the pawn attack, and the pawn attack were all close at hand. The next move, no matter which chess piece it was, the red side could launch an attack. However, the black side still didn't have a black right pawn. He had nowhere to run. Kawa completely collapsed. One ear, you're the first one I've seen who can say such a boring reason to show off so openly. You're really hypocritical. You don't even want to pretend anymore. Let me tell you, it's impossible. Even if you can win here, it's impossible. Unless you can get all the monks of the 10,000 Buddhas and consolidate my position in Shajia and gain 100 years of buffer time, maybe I can still mention it to the higher-ups. Lu Xiaoyi's expression brightened. He was waiting for this sentence. Senior sister, if you say so, I won't be sleepy anymore. Remember what you said today. You have to give me back a Xiaoyang mask in the future. At this moment, the red clouds rolled over and the red chariot pierced through. In the endless Buddhist voice, Lu Xiaoyi smiled ferociously. Chapter 8:19. The Buddha said that a man who practices Taoism is like a dry grass. When fire comes, he must avoid it. When a Taoist sees a desire, he must stay away. The monks still used the world of Buddhism first. This was the most common way for Buddhist disciples to fight. When they had the power to take the initiative and attack first, the world of Buddhism was almost the inevitable choice. Hong Che, 1,000 Buddhas, Dragon and Tiger Arhat, was the strongest person except for the new preacher. The enchantment he used was not the wonderful Prajna world. With his strength, he could not have his own world. This was a spiritual attack world contaminated with Buddhist words. In Hong Yan's letter, It could greatly affect the spiritual field of non-Buddhist cultivators and lay a solid foundation for the following battle. In Hong Yan's Dharma, there seemed to be an arhat with long hair descending to the world. He was tall and strong with angry eyes. He held a skanda staff and his body was covered with glazed light. He stepped down brilliantly. Everything was inferior. Kawa was far away, but she could feel the majesty of the brilliant Buddhist meaning. She had some thoughts of admitting defeat in her heart. She knew that under such an orthodox Buddhist inheritance, ordinary non-orthodox inheritance could not compete at all. The problem was that to admit defeat without fighting was not the character of a free and unfettered person. It was also showing weakness to the enemy. She decided to admit defeat after the previous 4 senior brothers fought a few rounds and showed that they could not hold on. This time, they had not even fought. How could she admit defeat? Although this one ear was wretched and disgusting, she had no intention of harming him in her heart. On the contrary, because of his various specialties, she had the intention to protect him. This guy was right about one thing. Others could not escape safely, but a new disciple who was attached to them would die in a fierce battle. This was the right way of cultivation. If this spread out, it would not be conducive to the unity of the factions in the free and unfettered world. No matter what, he could resist the first attack. Kawa was a little nervous. At this moment, there was a sword sound in the world of Buddhism. A voice said, "Hearing the Zen and knowing the meaning of Buddha, the great sound is hope. I have the firmament sword, which specializes in killing people who praise Buddha." A surging and intense murderous aura gushed out. Its essence came from the heaven and earth chessboard, which had been slaughtering for hundreds of thousands of years. It came from the same source and resonated with each other from a distance, instantly dispersing the Buddhist sound. Under the impact, the light of Buddha drifted away. From the forehead of the Arhavajra, a little red light suddenly appeared, followed by the nose, the mouth, the throat, and the chest. In the collapse of the blood light, the Arhat was cut into 2. Everything happened too quickly and too suddenly. Neither Arhat Hong Che nor the red-bald king had the time to react. They couldn't even summon the will to admit defeat and retreat. Lu Shi stood with his sword in hand and laughed loudly. He pointed at Kawa and said, "Senior apprentice sister, I knew that if I delayed any longer, you would have admitted defeat on my behalf. That's why I had no choice but to slash a little harder. Remember your promise. I'll give you face, and you'll return my favor. Isn't that the best of both worlds?" They were all smart people, and each of them had their own unique insight. Under this madman's sword, everyone inside and outside the chessboard was shocked. Each of them pondered. If they were the ones facing such an earth-shaking sword strike, how much chance of survival would they have? The answer was very depressing. Outside the chessboard, Fan Tong let out a long howl. He was so depressed that he didn't care if the people inside the chessboard could hear him. He shouted loudly, "Your request is beyond my ability, but there's still me and Junior Apprentice Brothers Willie. As long as you slash all the way, we'll definitely fulfill your wish." He clearly saw that among the monks of the 1,000 Buddhas, including Longhu Arhat, no one was a match for him at all. The only suspense was the Loki Red Soldier nun preaching the sutras. In fact, the direction of the chessboard was very clear. It all depended on the battle between this one ear and the preaching sutras. Kawa also understood. She knew that she had underestimated One Ear's strength. He dared to become a great thief in the Yellow Court, and dared to kill in the Red Hill Cloud Sea. This person did not rely on impulsiveness and recklessness. He was truly capable. This was probably the main reason why the great cultivators of the sect accepted him as their disciple. She knew that she might have to think of a way to fulfill this guy's request. She had connections in the upper class, and if she failed, she still had Fan Tong to support her. If she could really protect Shajia Little Land and take it back from the Middle Blood sect, this would be a great achievement, and there would be countless possibilities. It was her turn to throw the chopsticks again. This guy was already so good at defending. She wondered what would happen if he attacked. She threw the chopsticks, and it was the word king. Ka Hua sighed. This thing, even the heavenly Tao was avoiding it. Bald King, that was what Lu Heizu called him. Actually, his real name was De Zhang. Right now, he was feeling very complicated. Originally, the situation was great, and victory was just a step away. However, because of this thing that came out of nowhere, everything had changed. Of course, he didn't know that this was also an accident for the people of the Xiaoyao sect. From his point of view, this was a complete conspiracy by the Xiaoyao sect. They secretly sent the preaching sutras, but the Xiaoyao sect also sent the mask. With the strength of this Xiaoyao mask, except for the preaching sutras, no one could survive. Moreover, this guy's methods were ruthless and merciless. If one's reaction was slow, one's life would be in danger. How could he maintain enough confidence? For a sect like the swordsmen who killed bravely, they especially valued the accumulation of the opponent's power. In this kind of chessboard battle, the momentum advantage brought by consecutive victories was far from being offset by the consumption of magical power. Therefore, he had to make a plan. The best strategy now was to let the preaching sutras deal with him, and not let the others go up one by one. It was dangerous, but it also gave the opponent power. Therefore, a strange scene happened. On the black side, Lu Xiaoyi could only stand still because he couldn't throw out a black pawn. On the red side, although the black pawn was within the attack range, the red pawn didn't make a move. Obviously, they were waiting for a chance to throw out a red pawn. The game was limited to a dragging situation. It was a bit boring, but this was the charm of the sixth gambling. In fact, in war, whether in the mortal world or the world of cultivation, there were countless helplessness in the process. You couldn't do whatever you wanted. There were all kinds of fetters that made people helpless. After 3 rounds, Lu Xiaoyi was still sitting calmly, but the red pawn preaching sutras had drawn the jade chopsticks. The bald king wouldn't give up this opportunity because pawns were all short-legged. When the red pawn could defeat the black pawn, it was also when the black pawn could defeat the red pawn. Whoever drew the jade chopsticks first would make the first move. The advantage of the first move was very important when both sides were evenly matched. Although the black pawn hadn't been thrown out, who could be sure that it wouldn't be the next one? He had to make the first move. It's 2 against 1 again. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. But jokes were jokes, and when it was necessary to be cautious, he had to be cautious. When the red pawn was fighting with Fan Tong, although he was watching from the side, he wasn't there himself. There were some details that he didn't know. For example, with Fan Tong's strength, how could he be completely trapped in there without any room to struggle? This Prajna world of the preaching sutras was not simple. Chapter 820. The sutra speaker was still using her Prajna world. This was very normal. At their level, it was impossible for them to have many such sharp methods. Basically, it was their own trump card. There was no reason for them to abandon it after a single battle. However, this time, she took the initiative to use it. Unlike last time when she was passive, her preparations were more comprehensive, more complete, and more aggressive and resilient. In her cultivation career, there had never been a Jindan cultivator who could break through her great wisdom world. Even some of the weaker scattered soul cultivators could not do so. As long as her great wisdom world did not collapse, she would always be in an invincible position. The swordsman's outburst was frightening, but that was because her enchantment was not strong enough. If she had the most powerful world structure in Buddhism, what kind of beast could not be controlled? It consumed her mana and spirit, and it was futile. The strategy was to trap the opponent and fight a protracted war of attrition. This was also the best way to deal with an outburst of orthodoxy. Red clouds filled the sky, but before the red clouds filled the sky, a Buddhist world had already quietly descended. It had to be said that a battle scene like the chessboard of heaven and earth was the most suitable for orthodoxies who were good at enchantment. Lu Xiaoyi was in the Prajna world, but he did not attack recklessly. The timing was not right. Since the opponent had the initiative, he could only choose to accept it calmly. If he was in the wild, he would control the distance immediately, and use the flying sword to attack. He would not easily get involved, but the scene here was not right. A truly good world would not have a situation where it was weak at the beginning and then strong later on. Otherwise, wouldn't the trapped cultivator be able to escape easily at the first moment? The world of masters was only related to the resistance within the world. The more you resisted, the more you would be remembered by the Prajna world, which was equivalent to entangling more strings on your body. The more you did, the more mistakes you made. Just like Fan Tong in the past, struggling blindly only to be entangled more and more tightly. He needed to see it clearly first. Lu Xiaoyi was in the middle of it, and it was better than taking a stroll in the park. Occasionally, he would only bump into it a few times, but he did not use his full strength, and did not use any special skills. Similarly, the preacher's Prajna world did not take the initiative to attack him or entangle him. Everything was relative. For a Buddhist world, when you started to use Buddhist methods on the trapped cultivator, it was fine if you succeeded, but if you failed, the opponent would be able to see it more clearly. Similarly, the more you attacked, the more you were exposed. The Prajna world was divided into 6 types: Prajna, 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 and Prajna. The Prajna's name. The Prajna world was a metaphysical world. It was the origin of all things in the universe, which was also the world of enlightenment and understanding. It was the most fundamental of all Prajna. The Prajna of Prajna world was the way to verify the Prajna of Prajna. There was no birth of a thought, and the front and back were cut off. The reflection of the body was clear, and it was like a Buddha. It meant that there was no delusion in the mind. It meant that there was no thinking of the past or the future, but only when the soul and body were clear at the moment. It had 2 aspects of solitude and reflection at the same time. This was the same spiritual realm as the Tathagata, which was the Prajna of Prajna. Prajna of Prajna spirit was not obtained by cleverness, but it was naturally revealed after enlightenment. Prajna of Prajna of Prajna of Prajna used words to truthfully describe the body of the Dharma world and the method to enter the body of the Dharma world. It was the realm that the consciousness could reach, which belonged to the secular truth. Prajna of Prajna of Prajna of Prajna was great wisdom. For example, the most difficult thing to understand was to use a special method so that others could understand it the moment they heard it. This belonged to the Prajna of convenience. The level of Prajna of dependent Prajna and Prajna of contemplation was too high. It was not something that Lu Xiaoyi could understand with his current realm. In fact, he had also swallowed the first 4 Prajna in a hurry. However, to cultivators, when they reached their level, there was a basic understanding of some things. It was just that they could not go deeper. This preacher belonged to the stage of Prajna realm. This was already a very impressive achievement. It required extremely deep attainments in Buddhist principles. Under the premise that most monks could not form their own Prajna world, her achievement was a little abnormal. This was the true meaning of Buddha through preaching. It was not something that could be obtained through hard cultivation. Lu Xiaoyi carefully experienced it. He endured the subtle influence that was everywhere in the Dharma world. To him who was passively entering the Prajna world, the change had to come from him. This was the price of passivity. Continuing to waste time was the other party's intention. What he needed to do was to keep his trump card in his probing and discover the truth of this world, which was also its weakness. There must be the truth. The weakness must also exist. This was the balance of the heavenly axiom. There was no such thing as perfection and unsolvable. The Big Dipper came out from his dantian. This was his probing method. This method of releasing the sword was also the most common method in the upper realm of Zhou Xian. However, his real swordsmanship was the 5 sword plates hidden in the Naiwen Palace. The flying sword attacked from all directions. The boundary wall, the building, the golden body of Luohan, and everything else. The Prajna world rippled slightly. The preacher's counterattack followed. That was the voice of the Buddha in this world. Buddha's words, wherever Buddha goes, the country gathers. Nothing can be deceived. The world is peaceful, the sun and moon are clear. Wind and rain come at the right time. Calamities do not arise. Lu Xiaoyi's strength on the flying sword became stronger and stronger. It was accompanied by the louder and louder Buddha's voice. You took my life, I will repay your debt. This is karma. After hundreds and thousands of tribulations, I will always be in life and death. As the Big Dipper flew, there were traces of sword lights that were divided and added together. There were a few or a dozen of them. This was his attack while ensuring that his mana was full. In the Prajna world, the shaking intensified. Unlike before where one item was damaged at a time, now more than a dozen items were destroyed at the same time. Once they were destroyed, they were reassembled under the support of the Buddha's voice. They were destroyed again and reassembled again. This process was the way for both parties to test each other's foundation. Buddha is a speaker of the truth, a speaker of the truth, a speaker who does not lie, a speaker who does not speak differently, a speaker who speaks like a speaker. In Kawa's eyes, a large number of buildings in the Prajna world began to collapse. However, they were inconceivably rebuilt. The sharpness of the sword aura and the illumination of the Buddha's light evolved a reincarnation in the Prajna world. The destructive power of the flying sword made her gasp in amazement. She was very clear that she could not do this. However, that one ear had a calm expression, as if this was the most ordinary sword swinging. What made her feel even more depressed was the powerful resilience of the Prajna world. Even if it was constantly on the verge of collapse under the indiscriminate attacks of the flying sword group, but in this kind of tottering, it displayed an astonishing recovery power. It was as if there was an indescribable Buddha's connotation that made this world appear indestructible. Once Lu Xui started, he would not stop. This was also the swordsman's style. Aggression was like fire and violence was like thunder. In this kind of attack and defense reconstruction, suddenly, thousands of sword lights gushed out. Under the cleansing, all the illusory Buddha objects in the Prajna world were swept clean. It was the special sword light division of Lu Xiaoyi's Big Dipper sword plate. Chapter 821. The Prajna world collapsed and shrunk into a ball. However, before Kawa could express her excitement, the entire Buddhist kingdom was reborn from the collapse. It returned to its previous state, as if it was filled with Buddhist power. At the same time, she noticed that one ear's magical power reserves had been depleted by half in the Thousand Sword Light Division explosion. This caused her to be shocked. The normal way of thinking was that one ear would suddenly explode through the change of rhythm. After losing nearly half of his supernatural power, he still couldn't completely destroy the Buddhist land of the preacher. Then, how many more times could he explode with his supernatural power? The scales of victory began to tilt. At least, that was what the monks and Taoists thought. However, the preacher was still steady. This was because she knew that this guy still had half of his magical power left. He could still explode at least once. If one was not in this situation, one would not understand the terror of the flying sword. That kind of power was not something a Jin Dan cultivator could display. If he continued to waste time with her, she was not sure when she could end the battle. No one would be willing to fight with such an opponent. Everyone had their own strengths. The swordsman was good at finding opportunities in changes and fighting for opportunities in moments of life and death. However, as a Buddhist disciple, she was far behind in this aspect. However, she also had her own strengths. That was the tenacity of the Prajna world. Now, she had an obvious advantage in terms of magical power. The swordsman had wasted a lot of his magical power because he wanted to end the battle quickly. This was where her opportunity lied. She would not act rashly just because she had the advantage. The swordsman could be impulsive, but the Buddhist disciple would never be. Jin Dan Yi's anger came at the last moment. Lu Xiaoyi had already gotten what he wanted, so he spoke for the first time. Admit defeat! Don't let me kill both of you with one sword! The Buddhist's voice continued. Saints seek the heart, and not the Buddha. Fools seek the Buddha and not the heart. Mortals do not change their hearts. Saints do not change their hearts. Let me out. Don't make me do it myself. Lu Xiaoyi threatened. The Buddhist voice was loud and clear. Green bamboo is always Dharmakaya. Yellow flowers are nothing but prajna. Once you enter my world, if you don't follow Buddha, you can't leave. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. Did you know that I was born prematurely? When I wanted to go out, even my mother couldn't stop me. Who do you think you are? The NI ball vibrated, and the flying swords flew out. There were still thousands of sword lights, and their destructive power was even greater than before. They even contained some kind of profound principle, the 5 elements interception. The sword theory was so strange that it shattered the smoothness of the 5 elements, and stopped abruptly in the middle of operation. It was as if there was a fishbone stuck in one's throat, and there was nowhere to vent it. The great wisdom world was destroyed once again, but when it shrunk to the extreme and was about to be reborn, because of this strange interruption, it became incomplete, uncoordinated, and no longer flawless. The beheading luck flying sword nimbly spun around and slashed through the air. The Buddha world collapsed. Faith was gone. The bald king was the most cautious. He could not allow a scripture preacher to be killed in front of his eyes. As a Buddhist disciple, he could sense the prajna world. He knew that this time, it had really collapsed. It would never become a world again. Therefore, he used his consciousness to send a message to the chessboard of heaven and earth to admit defeat. He was worried that in this short moment, he would be caught by the swordsman. The flying sword was too fast, so fast that he could not react effectively. But his worry was unnecessary. The swordsman did not even use his sword to chase after the bald king. He only watched as the preacher disappeared under the great power of the chessboard of heaven and earth. Kawa was overwhelmed with emotions. She was one of the leaders who suggested to challenge the chessboard of heaven and earth, just like Fan Tong and Zwili. If they failed, it would not be as simple as her being punished, but her family and her faction would be humiliated. They, who followed the code of conduct of ancient Xiaoyao cultivators, would become weaker and weaker. The impact was far-reaching. It was not as simple as imagined. It was only little Lu's problem. But now, everything was settled. Among the 3 powerhouses of the 10,000 Buddhas, 1 Longhu Arhat was killed, and 1 preacher admitted defeat and left. Only Longhu Arhat was left to hold the fort. As for the other 2, they were nothing to be afraid of. Her problem now was how to fulfill her promise. It was easy to find a familiar enlightened master to send little Lu of the rainbow. The difficult part was the Xiaoyao mask. She could not guarantee it. But no matter what, she could now fully enjoy the joy of victory. This joy also brought her something different. For example, when she threw the chopsticks again, the jade chopsticks that fell out clearly wrote, "Black right pawn." Lu Xiaoyi took a step forward in a flashy manner, looking around proudly. This was his persona. After he made a name for himself in the celestial Zhou upper realm, he needed a suitable persona to cover up some things. In fact, it didn't matter what kind of persona he had. He could be deep, he could be cold, he could be playful, he could be low-key, he could be anything. But after thinking about it, he realized that the least tiring thing about pretending was this kind of persona. Maybe this was what he wanted the most in his heart. He could not do it in the past, but now he could let nature take its course. There were still 3 people left, including the Red King. 1 king, 1 minister, and 1 pawn. When he could finally pull out his feet, the battle would not drag on. What kind of strategy would the 10,000 Buddhas use to stop him? Fight to the death? He did not mind going on a killing spree. If the monks did not admit defeat in time, the bald king still had 2 pawns under him. Including him, they could still snipe the Xiaoyao mask 3 times. He saw clearly that when the swordsman made a gesture to the Black King, he wiped his face. This was a very clear hint. Only the Xiaoyao mask would do such a thing after winning. Then, what were their chances of winning? What made him despair was that no matter how he calculated, it was not more than 10%. Just like the Xiaoyao Black King, the 10,000 Buddha's Red King did not have a powerful cultivator on the prince's side. The two Dragon Tiger Arhats were the chariot and the minister respectively. The preacher was the red pawn, and he was just an ordinary Buddhist Arhat. He suspected that he could not even block a single strike from the swordsman. Because his strength was not high, and he only had a certain level of attainment in the 6-game chess, a chess player like him was especially worried about being held accountable after the game. It was not his fault that the information was not accurate. Therefore, the death of the first red pawn had nothing to do with him. Similarly, using the preacher to fight the Xiaoyao mask head-on was not a problem in terms of strategy. At that time, it was impossible to retreat. There had to be a winner between the two. The problem now was, should he continue to persevere? If he persevered and the other Dragon Tiger Arhat died here, it would be a problem of his control. He was not confident that he could safely rescue his companions at the most dangerous time. The swordsman's flying sword was too fast. If he did not persevere and took the initiative to admit defeat, would people think that he had lost the spirit of the 10,000 Buddhas and the heart of Buddha? It was a dilemma. Chapter 822. He looked at Hong Xiang, the only remaining Long Hu Luohan, and received a fierce look, as if urging him to quickly make a decision. Then he understood. When his companions began to act impulsively, he had to remain calm. From a technical point of view, although this sword cultivator had fought 2 battles in a row, in reality, the so-called consumption of transcendence energy did not affect him much. He could see very clearly that even after a burst of transcendence energy was reduced by half, the sword cultivator could still attack without any scruples. What was unexpected was that the flying sword no longer came out from his dantian, but from his naiwen. This was the real trump card of the carefree mask, right? The bald king made up his mind and chanted the name of Buddha. Amitabha, I, the 1,000 Buddhas, admit defeat in this game. The bell in the sky rang, and then the jade chopsticks and the chessboard disappeared. The people on the chessboard felt as if their bodies were being pressed down, and they had returned to the sky above Shijialu. On the ground, the monks and Taoists gathered. They did not participate in the game but were here to watch. The winner did not show joy, and the loser did not show sorrow. This was the basic cultivation of the Jin Dan cultivators. They were only fighting for land, not in a state of war. This battle was relatively peaceful in general, and not so bloody. This was because the strength of some of them was too strong, so strong that there was no need to settle it through bloodshed. Several people from the Carefree Travel Society were injured, and the severity was different. One of the 10,000 Buddhas died, and one of them was injured more seriously. Not to mention the death, the sutra preacher's prajna world was violently broken by Lu Xiaoyi. This had a profound impact on the nun. It might be an exaggeration to say that she could not practice Buddhism, but this prajna world was completely destroyed, and her strength was reduced by half. When the people on the chessboard landed, they felt that the cultivators on the ground were a little strange. It was not the confrontation that was strange, but the atmosphere at the scene was inexplicably strange. The strangeness did not come from the circle of carefree cultivators, but from the circle of 10,000 Buddhas. When Lu Xiaoyi stood on the ground, before he could receive the congratulations of his fellow disciples, a person walked out from the circle of 10,000 Buddhas. It was a nun, the sutra preacher, and the great Dafa's clothes were slightly open. She was nursing a child in her arms. Kawa's heart skipped a beat. Her first thought was, "Did I get a miscarriage?" The sister-in-law, on the other hand, was overjoyed from the bottom of her heart. Although the Buddhist power around her was weak and unstable, she still tried her best to form a barrier around the baby to keep him as warm as spring. When he walked up to Lu Xiaoyi, he did not greet him with a Buddhist salute. Instead, it was a blessing in the secular world. "Thank you, benefactor. Without you, this child wouldn't exist. Please grant me a name. Lu Xioi was not surprised, but in his mind, the names of countless eminent monks flashed through his mind, but none of them stayed. Only one name came out of his mouth. Ruhua. The scripture master's eyes were filled with tears as he turned and left. He smiled and whispered, like a flower blooming beautiful in the world. What a good name! Kawa hurriedly shouted from behind. Newborn babies can't eat too much. You're not carrying them in the right way. The monks quickly left. There were too many things waiting for them. In the vast land under the Middle Blood sect, there were too many believers that needed to be settled down, handed over, and made a comeback after 100 years. Zwilly winked and came up. Why should she thank you? Naming is the father's right. Why did she say that without you, there wouldn't be a child? Could it be that you did it? It doesn't make sense. How can it be so fast? It's like rolling dough. Fan Tong's thoughts were rigorous. Nonsense, you're not serious at all. Maybe it's an old flame, and they've been secretly communicating? Or I heard that there's a method of spiritual intercourse among the heretical sections. But you were able to give it to the scripture master of the 10,000 Buddhas continent. This ability is not as good as mine. Here they were talking without restraint and making jokes, but in fact, it was all a joke. It was just a way for them to vent after being extremely nervous. Only Kawa stood at the back, secretly shocked. She was the only witness at the scene. She was knowledgeable, and her realm was also here. She had interacted with the 10,000 Buddhas Imperial for hundreds of years. She also had a deep understanding of Buddhism. To be able to string these strange things together, the hidden things in it were shocking. That scripture master was pregnant, this could not be hidden from others. But what she did not expect was that this sister-in-law was so cruel to use the child in her womb as the starting point of her own nirvana rebirth in the Prajna world. This already had a hint of the devil's path. If it wasn't for that 1 year's outburst, she would not have thought that the child in this sister-in-law's womb had such a wonderful use. It was really unimaginable, a legend for thousands of years. 1 year's final victory was obviously made use of this point. The specifics of how it did it was related to the secrets of the sword vein, so it was not important. What was important was that 1 year's last sentence. If I want to go out, even my mother can't stop me. At that time, she only thought of this sentence as the rude words of a rude person without a trace of self-cultivation, which was just in line with this guy's habit of having a foul mouth. But now that she thought about it, these were not rude words, but simply reminding the scripture master, every life, even if it was an embryo, had the right to bathe in the sun. Even a mother had no right to stop it. Obviously, the scripture master finally understood this truth after the Prajna world was broken. Or, it was because of the Prajna world that she was freed from such a Buddhist barrier. In this sense, 1 year was a great kindness to her. Without this change in the chess game, if such a Prajna world continued, she would fall into the devil's path sooner or later. Not to mention the upper Bodhisattva, even the current Arhat status might not be preserved. Therefore, to thank her for her kindness, she asked for a name. This meant that in the cultivation world, there would never be enemies with her. Kawa was very smart, so she quickly figured out all of this. But she also knew that wisdom after the event could not be compared with intuition in battle. Until now, under the convergence of many clues, she finally understood all of this. But that 1 year, in the fierce battle scene, had considered all of this in a short period of time. Not only did he win the victory for Xiaoyao, but he also turned the enemy into a grateful person. This kind of mentality was really terrifying, making people shudder. Every time she thought of this guy's naive and childish face, hiding such a vicious heart under his shameless appearance, she felt a lingering fear. Unfortunately, it was not good to tell others. She began to hesitate. Was it really good to push such a person to the position of Xiaoyao mask? Would there be any hidden evil intentions? Would there be any ulterior motives? Would there be any other intentions? She decided that before making a decision, she would do her best to thoroughly investigate the origin of this person and how he entered the mountain gate. If his origin was unknown, she would definitely dare to ask for a judge to nip this disaster in the bud. If there was no problem, the mountain gate needed such a powerful mask. Even if she had to sacrifice her little face, she would fight for the treatment he deserved. While her thoughts were running wild, that person came to her side, smiling mischievously. "Senior sister, why are you in a daze? I just heard that senior sister is very good at taking care of babies. Could it be that senior sister has experience in this area?" Chapter 823. All of Kawa's thoughts and reason flew away in an instant. The only thing she was thinking about now was how to teach this guy a lesson. Next, they were nervous and busy. Because they won the chess game, Xiao Yu regained the territory they had lost 100 years ago under the rule of Blood Sect. This was a glorious victory. But it was more troublesome. They could use force to subdue the 1,000 Buddha monks, but they couldn't use force to forcefully change the beliefs of mortals. This was a task that required time, patience, and strategy. In fact, it wasn't suitable for most of them. They were all sent by Xiao Yu to fight. Now that the fight was over and everything went smoothly, of course, they had to change a group of preachers. A month later, another group of Xiaoyao cultivators arrived at Shaga. There were a total of 6 of them. They replaced Fan Tong Zueli and Cao Hua. Gu Huai and the other 3 who refused to participate in the chess game were ordered to stay in Shaga to help preach in the newly regained territory. On the surface, they needed the help of the old people who were familiar with the local situation, but in fact, it was a punishment. Gu Huai and the other 3 had nothing to say. Although their judgment was very accurate, their eyes only saw the outside, but they didn't see that there were actually freaks on the inside. After staying in Shaga for nearly 10 years, Lu Xiaoyu returned to Xiaoyao Mountain. He would wait for Ka Hua's promise to him in cultivation. In his opinion, it shouldn't be difficult to send a task related to the 7-colored little continent, but the Xiaoyao mask was a bit of a stretch. His current status was not at that level, and it had nothing to do with pure strength. After Ka Hua and the other 2 reported the changes in Shaga to the sect, she began her journey to find the truth alone. She only had one goal: to find the mastermind behind the Xiaoyao Yu. Generally, a search like this would not yield any results, because the negotiations between cultivators were often superficial. No one would leave behind any conclusive evidence, and there would not even be any obvious excuses. There was a kind of communication between cultivators called tacit understanding. There was also a kind of communication between superiors and subordinates called flattery. In this way, there were no traces left. However, this was only true for ordinary cultivators. To the cultivator clans within the sect, if they were willing to pay any price, there was nothing they couldn't find out. Kawa has a good mother, a senior Yuanying spiritual master, who is second to none in the carefree travel. With such expertise, she is destined to have a wide network of people. Who doesn't have a few great medicines with them when they go out? Kawa was her only daughter. Although she was not completely obedient, she was also very devoted. Since young, Kawa had always been strong and indifferent. She rarely asked for help from others, even if it was her own mother. Therefore, when she asked this time, it was not a difficult matter. However, she did not reject the background of a new disciple. Several days later, Kawa came to her mother's alchemy room and waited for the final news. Her mother ignored her and busied herself with the medicine in her hands. After a long time, she said, "Hua, how old are you?" Kawa didn't understand. "Mother, I'm 450 years old this year." "Why do you suddenly ask this?" His mother sighed. "I only had you when I was your age. For us cultivators, how lucky. Although cultivators shouldn't think about their families, they're women after all. Some things can't be avoided. On the path of cultivation, 2 people helping each other is always better than 1 person. You haven't found anyone pleasing to your eyes all these years. There are many cultivators with potential that you've missed in vain. If you're any later, the higher you go, the fewer choices you have. Kawa finally understood her mother's intention and hurriedly explained. It's not like that. This person is vulgar and rude. He has a foul mouth and a black heart. He has a honeyed mouth and a sword in his heart. I don't like him. It's related to the safety of the sect. I feel uneasy, so I asked you to inquire about it. Everything is for the public, absolutely without personal feelings. However, her mother was an experienced person and was not confused by her explanation. Too many experiences had allowed her to see through the world of mortals. How many enemies had fought and ended up in bed, including herself. But because she had seen too many, she would never urge her with words. It was better to be natural, so she returned to the main topic. That single ear you're talking about cost my boss a favor. I didn't expect that a small Jean Dan would involve so many experts. Kawa opened her eyes wide. Very complicated? A big conspiracy? Her mother knocked her head lovingly. You are so young, but you think so much. What big conspiracy can a small Jean Dan have? You don't have to scare yourself. I mean, his origin may be very high. I asked Immortal Mo, who is in charge of the external disciples, for help. He didn't know at all, so he pushed me to Immortal Ku. Immortal Ku didn't understand either, so he asked me to find Immortal Tian, who had retired. Immortal Tian was straightforward and directly threw the responsibility to his master, Immortal Day. I braced myself to meet Immortal Day, but was sent to Immortal Mowen. In the end, Immortal Mowen pointed up and chased me out, saying that I was worrying too much. Little girl, all the favors I've accumulated over the years have been used up in just one round. If it wasn't for the fact that it may be related to your personal affairs, I would also want to get to the bottom of it. I wouldn't have spent so much effort. Kawa was very surprised. Immortal Day was a Een soul immortal, and Immortal Mowen was a primordial soul immortal. If Mowen pointed up, needless to say, it must be the elusive Yang soul immortal of the Shaoyao Mountain sect. This was already the top level of the Zhou Xian upper realm, and there was no other possibility. As far as she knew, there were no more than 5 Yang soul immortals, even for a sect as strong as the Shaoyao Mountain sect. Mother, which old ancestor is it? Her mother smiled bitterly. You asked me, but who should I ask? I have practiced for nearly 1,000 years, and I have never seen a single old ancestor. I can't even touch the door. Do you think I can meet one just because I want to? Kawa smiled. She was making things difficult for her mother. 5 old ancestors, which one is it? Their whereabouts are unknown, and we don't even know who is and who is not. Forget it, mother, do you mean that this ear is probably fine? Her mother nodded at her. Speak properly. What ear? It's too unpleasant to hear. The ability of the Yang soul old ancestor is not something we can speculate about. The world is so big. What can a small Jean Dan hide from them? Since it was recommended by the old ancestor, whether it was intentional or not, it can't be wrong in nature. I also know about the changes that happened in Shajia. To be able to kill Longhu and retreat from the preaching of scriptures, only someone with such ability would be able to catch the old ancestor's eye, right? So, don't think too much about it. Why don't you bring him here one day? I'll check him out for you and see if this person has any tricks up his sleeve. Is he thinking of abducting my good daughter? Chapter 824. Lu Xiaoyi had been happy in the Carefree Mountain for a year. Unlike before when he was alone, he had at least a few friends now. For example, Fan Tong, Zueli, Jia Hua, and the others who had gone through life and death with him in Shajia. With their introductions, it was much easier for him to integrate into the sect. Others no longer treated him as a new Gold Core disciple, but as a proper Carefree Mountain disciple. All of this was earned with his strength. He couldn't interfere with the struggle of the upper echelons, and he couldn't even participate. He could only passively wait. until a year later Kawa found him. Seeing Lu Xiaoyi sweating profusely after swinging his sword in the morning, and his upper body naked, she frowned. Do you have to use this method to practice your sword? What's the difference between cultivation and martial arts in the mortal world? Lu Xiaoyi smiled and said, I like the feeling of sweating, as long as I can kill people. Bathe, change clothes. I'll take you to a place. Kawa waited in boredom, and found that this guy's bathing was really like jumping into a mountain spring. He even played the role of a soap opera. Wasn't the so-called bathing of cultivators a simple self-cleaning technique? How could it be so troublesome? If their habits were the same as those of mortals, then what was the point of cultivation? But she wasn't a shallow person. She thought that this might be a way to maintain a normal state of mind. When the two of them flew out one after another, she praised him, which was rare. It's really not easy for junior brother to maintain a normal state of mind. Lu Xi knew what she was talking about. Senior sister, you think too much. It's just that I'm not good at spells, especially this kind of water spell that requires fine control. It needs to be cleaned, remove dirt, and rubbed mud. It's not easy to control where the hair roots are hidden. Kawa was completely familiar with his crazy words. She knew that the best way to deal with it was to let it go in one ear and out the other. She couldn't take it seriously, or else it would never end until she couldn't control her emotions anymore. Their destination was the Great Freedom Hall, but before they arrived, Kawa stopped on a mountain peak. One ear! I have a question that you need to answer honestly. Otherwise, I won't do my best to help you this time. Lu Xiaoyi helplessly said. Senior apprentice sister, aren't you breaking the contract midway? It was damaging to his Dao heart. Ask away, but I can't guarantee that I'll be able to answer you. Kawa was very serious. Who introduced you to Xiao Yaoyu? Let me tell you, this is very important. It's related to whether or not you can obtain the carefree mask. Lu Xiaoyi's face was bitter. Hey, if I could answer this question, I wouldn't need to ask you for help. Someone else would take care of it for me. It's precisely because I can't say it that I'm begging you, senior sister, okay? Kawa knows very well that he must have been warned by the referees to not expose the referee's identity. This is very common in the world of cultivation. Most great cultivators are good at this kind of thing to avoid getting involved in things that are not karma. However, just because he can't say it doesn't mean that she can't ask. There are 3 springs next to Xiaoyaoyua Pond. One is Taiyin Spring, one is Yuanhui Spring, and one is Sanang Spring. Which one do you prefer? Lu Xiaoyi thought for a moment. Taiyin is clear and sweet, and Yuanhui has undercurrents. I like them all very much. Kawa smiled like a flower. This is the answer. Only mentioning Taiyin and Yuanhui but not Sanyang meant that the Yin spirit and primordial spirit could be revealed, but the Yang spirit couldn't be revealed. In other words, the default referees were Yang spirit supremes. This was a way for cultivators to avoid risks. It sounded ridiculous, but it was an indispensable part. Sanyang spring gushes during the day, calm at night, cool at summer solstice, warm in winter, and separated by rain. Which scene does junior apprentice brother like? There were 5 young spirit supremes in Xiaoyaoyu, namely Bai Mei, Yongyi, Xiazi, Dongji Yuyan, and Kawa. Lu Xiaoyi turned around and left. Senior apprentice sister, don't say any more. I don't want your help, okay? Kawa pursed her lips and counted in her heart. Sure enough, when she counted to 3, the one ear stopped. Senior apprentice sister, why aren't you stopping me? Kawa snorted. Why would I stop you? If you give up on your own initiative, I'll save myself some effort. Lu Xiaoyi spat back. Senior apprentice sister, can't you just give me a straightforward answer? I'm a straightforward person. If I succeed, I'll do it. If I don't, I'll think of another way. Kawa said bluntly. The mission to Rainbow Colors can be done anytime, anywhere. But this time, we're going to Great Freedom Hall to discuss whether you can get Xiaoyao mask. I've already done my best, including Fan Tong and Zwilly, but in the end, we can only advise our elders behind their backs, not make the final decision. This time, it's a few enlightened masters from Great Freedom Hall who want to meet you. As for the final decision, even I don't know. Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. The mission to Rainbow Colors is my wish, you know that. But whether I can become Xiaoyao mask or not isn't important. At worst I'll just wear a mask myself. Can't the sect allow it? Kawa reprimanded. You really don't know any rules. You actually dare to treat the sect's rules as a joke. When Xiaoyao mask goes out, not only does he have the glory and authority to lead Jin Dan cultivators, he also has the responsibility. Most importantly, he could be the target of other orthodoxies. Lu Xiaoyi didn't care at all. The thing I'm least afraid of is being attacked. Kawa was speechless. That's right. Other people might get into trouble if they put on a mask, and be beaten back to their original form. But this person wouldn't, because he was a vicious person who could push a preacher to the ground. As they got closer and closer to Great Freedom Hall, Kawa reminded him. 1 ear! Your problem is that your strength is more than enough to be Xiaoyao mask, and you also have battle records. But what you lack is connections, background, and the recognition of other Jin Dan cultivators. And all of these require a lot of time, not even 100 years. This is why I've been asking you who recommended you. In Xiaoyao travel, if an external disciple is recommended by a true monarch, everyone will give you some face and won't deliberately alienate you. They'll treat you as one of their own. If you're recommended by a sun god ancestor, what's a mask worth? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. After going around in circles, it turns out that I still have to rely on the back door. Kawa sneered. It's like this in the mortal world, and it's the same in the cultivation world. Everywhere pays attention to this. It's not just my Xiaoyao family. What's so strange about it? The two of them arrived at Great Freedom Hall. Kawa waited outside, and Lu Xiaoyi entered alone. He had only been to this place once when he was a new disciple, and it was a side hall. It was a bit like Xuanyuan's Thunder Hall or Soaring Heaven Pavilion. It was the highest decision-making body for all matters of the domain. Lu Xiaoyi found it funny that 5 perfected masters were sitting in the hall. Wasn't this a bit too grand? Wasn't it just a matter of a sentence whether one could wear the Xiaoyao mask or not? Was there a need to make it look like a joint hearing? What he didn't know was that deciding whether a Jin Dan cultivator was qualified to wear a mask was really not very important to a more casual orthodoxy like the Xiaoyao travel. It was far less formal than the preachers, tattoos, and imperial crowns of other sections. Generally, it was a perfected master's suggestion, and the other perfected masters of Great Freedom Hall just had to agree. Chapter 825. But this one was a little different. It wasn't his strength or battle record. These things were nothing in the eyes of the Yuanying Taoist master. What they were curious about was that a Jin Dan who could obtain the favor of the sun god ancestor had personally brought him into the sect. What kind of person was he? Watching the show turned into a small evaluation meeting. But in fact, there was nothing to evaluate because this little guy's resume was not complicated. He had joined the Carefree Travel Society decades ago, and then went to the Yellow Court continent to be a bandit. He might have killed the Yuanying Taoist master. Then there was Red Hill, but the record was that he had killed at least 10 Jin Dan in the Red Hill Cloud Sea. Then there was Shajia Little Lu. He had killed a dragon tiger Arhat and defeated a sutra preacher. With his own strength, he had reversed the unfavorable situation of the 10,000 Buddhas. It had to be said that his strength was very strong. No wonder he was chosen by the ancestor. Who recommended you? A Taoist master asked casually. It was a Taoist master, but he didn't allow me to use his name. Lu Xiaoyi told the truth. Have you learned the free and unfettered fundamental law? Another Taoist master asked. No, I don't have the qualifications. I still need time to gain experience. Have you returned to the 7 colors after entering? The third Taoist master asked. No. But I really want to go back and take a look. Just take a look. Why do you want to wear a mask? This was a Taoist master with a solemn face. I have the heart to show off. I don't want to wear brocade clothes. Have you ever had a Taoist companion? The last Taoist master asked an unrelated question. This I have also privately pledged to marry. As far as I know, you don't have a Taoist companion in the 7 colors. This is my personal matter. Please forgive me for not answering. It was a very simple question, but it made Lu Xiaoyi scratch his head. Especially the last question. It seemed ordinary, but in fact, it directly hit his vital point. Because he wasn't familiar with the life of this 7-color swordsman, he could only guess. He couldn't say no, because there might be. He couldn't say yes, because there might not be. Therefore, privately pledging to marry was probably the best answer. Then, he would refuse with privacy. This was actually in line with his real Taoist companion's situation. Whether it was Han Yan or Xia Bingji, they were both in this situation. The dignified immortal obviously had the right to decide on the matter of mask. The carefree mask isn't just about glory. It also means that you have to pay a price and risk. You can't refuse more missions. You have to bear the most difficult responsibility. So, are you still willing to wear a mask for Xiaoyao? Lu Xiaoyi said without hesitation. Yes. For Xiaoyao? The enlightened master pursued relentlessly. No, for myself. I'm a swordsman. To me, danger is an opportunity. Without the tempering of life and death, the path of a swordsman would not be long. Of course, I'm willing to do something for Xiaoyao during this process, just like in Shaka. The 5 spiritual masters no longer paid any attention to him. It was obvious that they were communicating with each other through divine consciousness. You're quite honest. It's understandable that you want to go back to your hometown. We're not unreasonable people. None of us had expected that the 10,000 Buddhas would send out a sutra preacher in the Battle of Sagara. For him to be defeated, there's no problem with his strength. Traveling by day in brocade clothes can also set an example for the other little lands. My carefree travel doesn't have to fade into the crowd. As long as you work hard, my carefree travel won't hesitate to give you a chance to improve. Humph. This person isn't honest. What private vow? He doesn't have any kun cultivators in the 7 colors continent. He's just an ascetic cultivator who wholeheartedly focuses on the path of the sword. But in the Yellow Court continent, he hooked up with 2 Yellow Court kun cultivators. It's unclear. What private matter? I think there's a problem here. A enlightened master smiled bitterly. Senior apprentice Sister Jia, we're in the Great Repose Hall. Let's not involve our own family matters, okay? That girl of yours has always had her own ideas. She might not appreciate your kindness. The dignified immortal sighed. These guys talked for a long time without mentioning the most important thing. This was a cultivator introduced by the sun god ancestor. Of course, they had to give him face. This was the reason why they were all speaking well of him, right? He was actually the same as well. Everything needs to have a beginning. Letting the new Jin Dan become a mask is also in line with my carefree travel's principle of educating without discrimination. It can set an example and put an end to the increasingly fierce factional disputes in the sect. In the end, he's just a Jin Dan. If he doesn't do anything, how much trouble can he cause? He can't even leave the domain. My opinion is to give him the right to be a carefree mask. There's only one condition. For the time being, don't give him the right to mobilize the carefree Jin Dan group until he proves himself. After all, what we see now is only his personal strength. This is different from team operations. What do you all think? Everyone agreed. This was a very thorough decision. Not only did it compensate this person for his meritorious service, but it also wouldn't cause him to make a big fuss. The key was that everyone was very devoted to the ancestors' people. That was the sun god. Even if they died, the sun god wouldn't die. Lu Xiaoyi smoothly obtained his mask. It wasn't a piece of paper, a piece of skin, or a mask like he had imagined. It was more like a piece of plasticine the size of a soybean? Kawa reminded him from the side. Don't underestimate it. The Carefree Mask is the top item in my Carefree Travels Jean Dan. It has endless uses. You need to spend some time familiarizing yourself with it. The most important thing is that the mask can't be placed in a storage ring, nor can it be placed in a cultivator's body. Lu Xiaoyi was very curious. Where do the cultivators who get this stuff put it? Kawa thought for a moment. Usually, it's placed on the tip of the nose. In any case, this thing is also soft, so it's very convenient to use. And it's best not to leave the mask so it saves time. Lu Xiaoyi didn't like this method. He rolled the small piece of plasticine into a ball and stuffed it into his nostrils like booger. Kawa turned her head. One ear, you're so disgusting! Lu Xiaoyi laughed mischievously. This senior sister was not bad. She was loyal enough to do what she said. Senior sister, the most important problem has already been solved. Why is it so easy to delay again and again? I don't think the sex missions have anything to do with the 7-colored continent. Kawa glared at him. Are you stupid? The matter of returning to your hometown isn't urgent. If you go later, the 7-colored continent won't disappear. In another 3 months, it will be the decennial opening of the Sparrow Palace's space. It's also the most important time for us Jean Dan cultivators to train our Sea of Consciousness. If we miss this opportunity, we can only wait for another 10 years. You didn't have the right to enter before, but now that you're the Carefree Mask, of course you have the right to enter. Why should you miss it? I saw that your flying sword came out from your brain palace, so the Sparrow Palace's space is just right for you. For an opportunity like this, the earlier you enter, the better. Of course, if you don't want to, just pretend I didn't say anything. I'll arrange your mission now. Lu Xiaoyi solemnly clasped his hands. My parents gave birth to me. Chapter 826. As for the Sparrow Palace, Lu Xiaoyi had a plan, but his plan depended on his position in the Carefree Travel. The Carefree Mask was the most likely position he could obtain for himself, even if it meant taking some risks. Firstly, it depended on his strength, and secondly, it depended on the white-browed old man. The Sparrow Palace was a way for cultivators to use their mental strength. It was not a mental attack, but focused on the construction of one's mental world. It was a type of inner secret. Every orthodoxy with a long history had its own unique method in this aspect. This was because the effect of mental energy in the later stage of a cultivator was unparalleled. Its importance was even above that of mana. Cultivation and mana were only a platform. It determined the lower limit, but mental energy determined the upper limit of a cultivator. The Xianyuan sword school also had its own unique application of mental strength. Its core was the sword vein, which closely revolved around the application of the sword pill. This was also the tradition of the sword vein. They pursued practicality too much, completely focusing on how to make the flying sword sharper. This could indeed achieve amazing results in battle, but it was slightly monotonous. Of course, the Dharma vein also had its own things to nurture, such as the natal spiritual weapon. If a swordsman could nurture the sword pill in his Naiwan palace, there was no reason that the Dharma vein, which was more proficient in mental strength, could not do so. The Sparrow Palace was the place where the Carefree Travel cultivators nurtured their natal spiritual weapons. Of course, it was not limited to spiritual weapons. Among the 9 great inheritances of the Zhou-Xian Upper Realm, each had its own unique advantages. Wanyan Creation's advantage was in the communication and coordination with nature. Qingwei Immortal School's strength was in the uniqueness of the forbidden spell. Huanting Taoism was good at internal secret operations. Taixian Middle Yellow Refinement used the body as medicine. Yuan Sher Cave focused on mysteries. Human Sect focused on simple and unadorned pores. The Carefree Travel was good at mental strength. The Sparrow Palace was the pinnacle of mental strength, but there was a prerequisite. First, one had to cultivate a unique mental strength through the 3 basic techniques of the carefree travel. Then, there was the space of the Sparrow Palace. Just like the small world of the sword tomb in Xianyuan, without it, there would be no sword pill. Similarly, in the carefree travel, without the space of the Sparrow Palace, the cultivator would not be able to form the Sparrow Palace in the sea of consciousness. He valued this point because he was not a pure inner swordsman. What he had was a sword disc, not a sword pellet. This was not a small difference. From a certain perspective, the difference was huge, and it was fundamental. Therefore, Xuanyuan's inner sword's spiritual cultivation technique might not be suitable for him. With his personality, even if he was an authentic internal sword, he would not give up on accepting other systems. In his bones, there was a revolutionary ideology. He had always felt that no one understood the sword better than him, including the sword itself. The space of the Sparrow Palace was a special spiritual construct. It was opened once every 10 years to recover the spiritual energy that had been extracted by the cultivators. The number of people allowed to enter the space of the Sparrow Palace was not unlimited. The maximum number of people allowed to enter the space of the Sparrow Palace was 36. For the carefree wanderers who had thousands of Jin Dan, the competition was very fierce. With Lu Xiaoyi's qualifications, if he did not make a great contribution in Shajia and did not pull the banner of a tiger, he might not have this kind of opportunity in the entire Jin Dan period. After all, just by comparing the numbers, more than half of the carefree wanderers would not be able to enter the Sparrow Palace in their entire lives. This was also a way for the sects to control their disciples' pursuit of progress. If something was too cheap or too abundant, it would not attract the cultivators' pursuit. It would also lose the atmosphere of competition, which was detrimental to the cultivators' growth. The 36 cultivators were sitting around a stone pagoda. The pagoda was called trance. Every 10 years, a great cultivator of the sect would place the space of the sparrow god at the top of the pagoda, and the cultivators' divine souls would enter. Yes, it was not the physical body that entered. The physical body would remain outside the space, but the spiritual consciousness would enter. Among the countless similar trial spaces, it could be considered a rather unique type. When the space of the Sparrow Palace was opened, Lu Xiaoyi felt that there was a faint spiritual passage at the top of the stone pagoda. This required the cultivator's spiritual energy to reach a certain level to be able to clearly sense it and smoothly pass their spiritual consciousness into the space. Just this alone was enough to stop a lot of cultivators who were unable to improve their spiritual energy. He started cultivating his spiritual energy when he was still in the foundation establishment stage. Until now, it had been almost 400 years. This was also very rare among the Jin Dan cultivators. Although the spiritual energy training method was not too formal and was not compatible with the fundamental techniques of the carefree wanderers, the level of his spiritual energy was still there. This could not be faked. Smoothly passing his spiritual consciousness into the space of the sparrow god was like throwing a few years old child onto the beach. Playing with sand was his instinct. The child was illusory, and his spiritual energy was his hands and feet. The strength of his spiritual energy depended on the level of his spiritual energy. If his spiritual energy was strong, he would be able to move more sand in one go. If his spiritual energy was weak, he would be able to move less sand. Let's see who could build their own spiritual palace in a certain amount of time. Regarding the use of spiritual energy, regardless of the orthodoxy, in the end, all roads lead to the same destination. Lu Xiaoyi did not have the delicate control of spiritual energy like the 3 fundamental techniques of the carefree wanderers. However, he had Xuanyuan's internal sword and had many experiences of building the Bo Lang slope. Therefore, he was not unfamiliar with it, but he was slower than the others. His advantage was that he was familiar with it, and his goal was clear. He had never thought that he would create such a novel thing here. The blueprint was the Bo Lang slope, and the goal was to have a place to train the sword's spirit. This was the simple way of thinking of a swordsman. He did not change the spiritual cultivation method of the internal sword because he wanted to abandon it. He also did not absorb the spiritual cultivation method of the carefree wanderers because he wanted to become a spiritual cultivator. He only wanted to use the strengths of the two schools to find the most suitable method for his own sword plate. This was something that could not be helped, because the internal system of his swordsmanship was also something that he had created himself. There was no other method that could match it. The child on the beach was holding sand, gathering sand, and piling up sand with great difficulty. This sand was not the mystical pure sand when he first built the Bo Lang slope, nor was it the sword box of the Wei Sword Mountain later on. These were all tangible objects. The space of the carefree wanderer's sparrow palace was magical in that it could transform the invisible spiritual energy into tangible objects. It was convenient for the cultivator to directly understand and build it. After the construction was completed, the cultivator would move it back to the sea of consciousness in his body. Without the interference of external objects, this was purely one's own mental strength. As the cultivator's mental strength, cultivation level, realm, and understanding of the Tao improved, the entire Sparrow Palace would be able to connect seamlessly and improve as well. It did not need to be like the Bo Lang slope in the sword box. When the realm increased and the sword's spirit grew, he had to find another external object and reconstruct it. Not only was it tiring, but it also fell behind because of the addition of external objects. A three-dimensional prototype of the Bo Lang slope gradually became clear in the child's hands. During the process, due to the lack of experience, there were often signs of collapse, instability, and even being washed away by the waves. He knew that this was normal, and he needed to accumulate experience. Chapter 8:27. With the accumulation of experience, Lu Xiaoyi gradually understood the essence of sand accumulation. This was due to his early research on the Carefree Sparrow Palace's method, as well as his hundreds of years of experience in constructing the Bo Lang slope. After putting it into practice here, he developed his own set of methods. The reason why it was called the Sparrow Palace was not without reason. It was because when the spiritual model was constructed in the spiritual world, the form of a sparrow was the most resistant to impact. In the space of the Sparrow Palace, this kind of impact was achieved in the form of waves crashing. If it truly existed in the mind of a cultivator, it would be the impact of the opponent's spiritual realm during a battle. The head of the sparrow was shaped like a wedge, splitting the incoming impact. The two wings bore the main pressure of the impact. The tip of the tail maintained the stability of the Sparrow Palace during the impact. This was the shape that the Carefree sect had determined after countless attempts by countless cultivators for hundreds of thousands of years. Lu Xiaoyi also did not want to change it. This was not the time for jokes. He had to make the Tiger King, octagon shape to disgust himself. When everything was settled, a large bird-shaped Bo Lang slope began to take shape on the beach. Under the unceasing impact of the waves, it was as stable as a boulder. Thus, an even more detailed internal construction began. Lu Xiaoyi didn't know much about the forms of birds. His interest wasn't in this area. If he had to find a form that left the deepest impression on him, it would be none other than the graceful bird he saw in the mysterious space of the Peacock Palace. His impression of its body seemed eternal as it flapped its wings. As for what kind of bird it was, what kind of sparrow it was not important to him. He had been cooped up in the space of the peacock plume for no less than 50 years. He was familiar with every feather of that graceful bird and every muscle hidden under the feathers. Thus, he drew the outline according to the gourd drawing a ladle. Right now, the outline was perfect and lifelike, except for the expression in the eyes that could not be replicated. What Lu Xiaoyi didn't know was that his construction outline was the most complicated among all the cultivators present. Although the other free cultivators also used the shape of a bird, most of them were based on the most standardized pattern passed down by their sects for hundreds of thousands of years. This was because such a pattern was the easiest to build the Sparrow Palace. It was the most economical, the most fitting, and the most time-efficient. However, while they had built Xiao Yao's standard sparrow, Lu Xiaoyi's was a custom-made sparrow. It was more complicated and detailed. He knew that as long as he entered this place, as long as his spirit didn't wither, he wouldn't be chased out. Therefore, he used it to his heart's content. Even the feathers under the big bird's neck, the crown, and the shape of each feather were all perfect. He was a clumsy painter, but replicating it wasn't a problem. Time slowly passed by while he was nitpicking. Slowly, there were cultivators who left after completing their work. There were also cultivators who regretfully failed due to their weak spirit. He went from being the last group of people to being the last few. Lu Xiaoyi felt that his eyes were a little big and his stomach small. When he tried his best to complete the outline of this big bird, he originally thought that he had enough spirit to use, but the more detailed the parts, the more the spirit was consumed. If he were to draw the final finishing touch, he was afraid that he would need a terrifying consumption. Even if he was full of spirit, he wouldn't be able to bear it. But at the same time, as the big bird's general outline was completed, he was surprised to find that from the big bird itself, there was a faint feedback of spirit power that reached a wonderful balance. Would everyone be like this? He wasn't sure. If he continued, although the consumption would become greater and greater, the compensation from the big bird would also become stronger and stronger. It seemed like he could still maintain it, but whether he could maintain it until the final moment, until the crucial point of finishing touch, was completely hard to say. Right now, he needed to make a decision. Should he end it hastily while he still had some spirit power, or should he continue to sculpt it? If he ended it hastily, the Sparrow Palace could still be used. It was just that it was a little perfunctory and might not achieve his goal. If he took a gamble and bet that the big bird would be able to help him at the final finishing touch, he might get a perfect and unique Sparrow Palace. The risk was that he might fail at the last moment. In an instant he made a decision. It seemed like this wasn't a special decision for a swordsman. Swordsmen, after all, had a strong desire to gamble. Outside the stone tower, Kawa silently stood outside. She looked at the cultivators who had finished condensing the fastest. Some of them were happy, while others were depressed. Only a few days had passed. According to the history of the Sparrow Palace, it was basically possible to complete it within 5 days. Those who couldn't complete it would be considered a failure. The spirit power of a cultivator wasn't enough to stay in the Sparrow Palace for too long. However, that fellow didn't come out. With her limited understanding of that fellow, if he wasn't the first to come out, he would definitely be the last to come out. She had entered the Sparrow Palace before and spent 4 days. For a cultivator like her who had a certain level of strength and abundant resources, as well as her mother's advice, it was very difficult for her to fail in condensing the Sparrow Palace. However, for cultivators who didn't have the same conditions as her, there was a 30% chance that they would fail. If she could pass through the Sparrow Palace so easily, that fellow couldn't pass through it, right? Kawa didn't know why she had to wait here. In fact, this had nothing to do with her. It was a kind of feeling, a kind of uneasy feeling. She didn't mean what her mother said. Cultivation was her only path. She also didn't think that it was necessary to have a Taoist companion on the path of cultivation. There were people who helped each other, but there were also people who hurt each other. Why should she add such a shackle to herself? She felt a little uneasy in her heart. This was a kind of intuition. In her heart, she had always admired and doubted this one ear. This person's current status wasn't lacking in her promotion. She didn't know whether she was doing the right thing or not. This one ear always made people unable to see through him. It was as if there was a layer between them. There was a layer of inexplicable things that separated them from one of their own. However, she couldn't figure out what exactly it was. Therefore, she had to keep an eye on him. This time, the opening of the Sparrow Palace was full of strangeness. Overall, the time that the cultivators used was longer than usual. Now, half a month had already passed, and there were still 5 cultivators inside. They didn't fail because they didn't have enough spiritual energy, and they didn't take the initiative to leave after they succeeded. What were they dawdling for? It seemed that when this fellow participated, there was always something strange about it. Half a month later, the Sparrow Palace's space on the stone pagoda closed. The last 5 cultivators recovered from their mental wanderings. Kawa carefully observed them, but didn't seem to see anything special. Everyone revealed an exhausted expression because their spiritual energy was overdrawn. Kawa was careful and didn't directly ask that fellow. Instead, she pulled a close sister. She was also one of the last 5 people in the Sparrow Palace's space. "Little one, what happened inside? Why did you come out so late?" That woman was also very gloomy. "I don't know either. It's baffling. It seems like there was no more sand at the end of the condensation. Originally, the key was to gather sand, but in the end, it became to find sand. So where did all the sand go? Could it be that the Sparrow Palace's 10 years of storage wasn't full this time?" Chapter 828. Lu Xiaoyi had gained a lot this time. This time, he did it unintentionally and casually. He didn't know the meaning behind it. He only felt that it was very elegant and very classy. However, it brought him a very unexpected change. The most direct change was that the moment his spirit left the space of the Sparrow Palace, the big bird flew back to the sea of consciousness in his body. A strange change occurred. The big bird in the sea of consciousness, and the ball of luck that had been entrenched in his mind for a long time uncontrollably merged into one. The result was that in the boundless sea of consciousness, there was only a big colorful bird left. The shape of the Sparrow Palace and the color of the ball of luck combined into a lifelike and dazzling unknown big bird. Arrogant, cold, elegant, as if it was the only one in the world. "Are you okay? Why do you look a little distracted?" Kawa looked at him curiously. Unfortunately, she couldn't see through the abnormality in his mind. Lu Xie came back to his senses. "I'm fine. This bird is making it very hard for me." Kawa looked at him suspiciously. "Could it be that you were delayed for so long because you couldn't move the sand in the end?" Lu Xiaoyi laughed dryly. "Yes, I could only rely on snatching. Fortunately, I was quick." Kawa pursed her lips. "Snatching, isn't that your old profession?" Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. In the final stage, he did start to move the sand in the surroundings, and even the entire space of the Sparrow Palace. However, this process was a little involuntary. If he didn't snatch, he wouldn't be able to complete the final outline. With the help of the big bird, his spirit power wreaked havoc in the entire space of the Sparrow Palace. He moved 90% of the sand and the rest were divided among the few people. This kind of thing was not good to say. It would seem like he was eating alone, and he was indeed eating alone. "Next, I will soon ask a perfected person to issue a mission related to the 7 colors. After that, you and I don't owe each other anything." Kawa also relaxed a little. The future was the future. At least for now, she had done what she promised. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. "What's there to talk about owing each other? How can I forget senior sister's help? In the future, if senior sister wants something outside but can't get it, just tell me and I'll snatch it for you." Kawa sneered. "Do you think everyone is like you? If it's mine, it can't run away. If it's not mine, I won't even think about it. You don't have to thank me. As long as you sincerely stay in Xiaoyao and do a few more things like Shaka, I will be satisfied." Lu Xiaoyi returned to his cave abode and carefully analyzed the usage of the Sparrow Palace. He drew the sword, sheathed it, and nurtured it. He was very satisfied. The Boang slope that he had constructed in the form of a giant bird had finally become a place for him to break through. The sword spirits in the Boang slope would directly face the growth of his cultivation and soul. There would be no more obstacles. Instead, their growth would be based on his own strength and synchronized with his growth. The sword spirits could no longer be lazy, unless they were stronger than their master. The Tao realm of the 5 elements could exist at any time in the form of a giant bird, constantly affecting the perception of the sword spirits. In time, the deeper Lu Xiaoyi's understanding of the Tao realm, the deeper the sword spirit's understanding of the Tao realm. The speed of drawing the sword was even faster. Through the frequency of the giant bird's wings, the sword disc would have a considerable speed when it rushed out of the mud ball. In addition, the flying sword was straightened, which allowed the materialized sword to achieve an almost extreme speed when it left the body. This meant that his materialized sword would give the opponent a shorter time to react. The vibrating sword disc would send out the virtual sword, and the sword light would split. He no longer needed to shake himself like a sieve. Those who understood would know that he was releasing the sword, but those who didn't would think that he was just shaking. Now that he was using the vibrating sword disc, he could completely replace the frequency of his impulsive stimulation with the giant bird's wings. These 2 methods were not on the same order of magnitude. The flapping of the wings could be unlimited, but the impulsive stimulation needed to consider many other constraints, such as the endurance of the meridians and acupoints. The giant bird could also evolve into a spiritual attack. Through the control of the Sparrow Palace, 1 or several giant birds' spiritual bodies could fly out and form a spiritual shock on the enemy. Its power was extremely terrifying. This was only the magical effect that he had discovered over a month ago. There were definitely more, but he needed to slowly ponder and explore it. But he couldn't do it for the time being, because the mission that Ka Hua promised him had already been issued. It was on the mission list of the Great Freedom Hall. Lu Xiaoyi took a look at it, and was somewhat speechless. Immortal, I just want to go back and take a look. Isn't this mission a little too big? Lu Xiaoyi found Immortal Mo, who was also the immortal in charge of the new disciples. He was also one of the 5 immortals who had decided whether he was qualified to become the carefree mask in the Great Freedom Hall. The mission clearly stated that he needed to meet Immortal Mo, but there were some things that couldn't be stated on the mission list. When I agreed to let you wear the carefree mask, I told you that you couldn't choose the mission. Why are you going back on your words so quickly? Lu Xiaoyi was embarrassed. I thought that this was a special arrangement for me to return home. It's not that I'm afraid of the risk, but that this way, I'm afraid that I won't be able to watch from afar. I can only completely blend in. After hundreds of years together, even if I wear a mask, I can't fool anyone. This seems to be inconsistent with the original intention of the sect. The 7-colored mission this time was like this. There were many orthodoxies of the sword vein in the upper world of Zhou. There were more than 10 of them, big and small. However, there were only 9 branches that could establish a foothold on a continent and control a small continent. The 7-color sword sect was one of them. Among these 9 branches, there was a branch called the Yaoying Sword Palace. Its strength was average among the 9 sword vein branches. However, the position of the Yaoying Sword Palace in the upper world of Zhou was rather awkward. It was too close to the outer layer of the nebula. In other words, like the Shajia Little Continent, it was fought for control by 2 upper sects. These 2 upper sects were the Bitter Zen Temple and Wanyan Creation. Unlike the 3 small sects on the Shajia Little Continent, there was only one local sect on the Yaoying Little Continent, and that was the Yaoying Sword Palace. This was also a major characteristic of the sword vein. As long as they had enough strength, no matter how much they had to pay, they would definitely drive out the other forces and dominate the continent. Domination was only for the other branches. When there were 2 upper sects fighting for control, and one was Buddhism and the other was Taoism, the Yaoying Sword sect could not fight back. The result of the fight was that Bitter Zen won and dominated the Yaoying Sword Palace alone. Wanyan Creation quietly withdrew. This was considered normal among the 3,000 branches in Zhou. From then on, it obeyed Bitter Zen and allowed Buddhism to establish Buddhism in the Yaoying Sword Palace, becoming the spiritual sustenance of the secular world. However, after 100 years, the Yaoying Sword Palace felt that something was wrong. This was because the sword vein, which was a distant branch of Taoism, was naturally incompatible with Buddhism. This was because the spread of Buddhism's beliefs had already affected the foundation of the sword vein. This was because Buddhism was all-pervasive and the sword vein would rather break than bend. When the Yaoying Sword Palace realized that their inheritance was threatened and that it was difficult for them to recruit disciples, they resolutely resisted and resorted to force. This was the cultivation world. Wang Laoji and Jia Duobao fought and He Qijing was gone. Chapter 829. Buddhist beliefs have always been like this. Although they never reject other beliefs on the surface, in reality, they go down the path of extermination. It may seem like they're swallowing it gently, but after 100 years, other orthodoxies won't even have a place to stand. We Taoists are different. We have a sense of propriety when it comes to spreading. It doesn't matter if you believe it or not. We never let the mortal believers blindly believe in us, and we even deliberately control the audience. We're afraid that in the end, everyone will be Taoists. That's not a good thing. It's easy for Taoists to forget themselves and become arrogant. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. You're right, spiritual master. This is also the reason why I did my best in Shaka. Spiritual Master Mo smiled and said, We Taoists have a common responsibility to pass down the legacy. Protect most of the small continents in the immortal Zhou upper realm and ensure that they have the space to choose. They have a free sky and can breathe freely. They won't be brainwashed into some so-called Buddhist nation or benevolent land. This is the philosophy of the Taoist sect. You have to know that evil has its roots too, and it can't be washed away. A piece of land can only exist eternally when there's a balance between kindness and evil. A single act of kindness and a single act of evil can't last long. If there's really a Buddhist land, then there's only one result. They'll keep kindness to themselves and add evil outside of the Buddhist land. This is also a kind of balance. So in the small lands of Shaking Shadow, the swordsmen can't tolerate it, and the monks still think that they're saving the poor and are merciful. Isn't that laughable? Spiritual Master Mo's words were a little boastful, but it had to be said that some of his understanding of Buddhism was accurate. Most Taoists closed their doors and comprehended on their own. They paid attention to their own integrity and looked at the world from the sidelines. Taoists preferred to form groups. If everyone worked together, it would be easy to create an atmosphere around them, and drag unrelated people down with them. It was as if those who didn't believe in Buddhism weren't kind and wouldn't have the chance to reincarnate. This was also a kind of reverse pressure. Unknowingly, it quickly grew stronger and satisfied the wishes of many people to join a certain organization. They could also obtain a consolation that they were also people with organizations. Spiritual Master is right. But this rule is unfair. Isn't it too biased towards Buddhism? If it were up to me, we should just fight. Or directly go to the heaven and earth chessboard. Rolling my eyes and glaring at him will save me a lot of trouble. Sensing that he had strayed from the topic, Taoist Mo turned back. Rude. This is a typical swordsman's way of thinking. Let's not talk about why our ancestors set such a rule. Let's just talk about the fact that Wanyan's good fortune lost the wavering shadow Little Lu. This is not only Wanyan's good fortune's loss, but also our Taoism's loss. Therefore, we can't let him get it for nothing. The shadow-shaking sword palace is indeed a sword vein legacy. They are courageous and courageous. The 9 sword vein of the entire Zhou Xian upper realm are standing together. This time, they have vowed to fight for the rights of the indigenous forces in the shadow-shaking sword palace. Therefore, the 9 sword vein are preparing to gather in the shadow-shaking sword palace to seek justice. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. Perfected one, I'm afraid there are also other Taoists fanning the flames, right? Otherwise, how would they dare to fight against a Buddhist sacred mountain with just their sword vein? Taoist Mo didn't shy away at all. What do you mean by fanning the flames? Putting it so harshly, they are simply standing up for justice. There's nothing strange about it. Everyone understands. It's precisely because they have the support of several Taoist sacred mountains, such as Wanyan's Good Fortune, Primeval Cave, Huanting Taoism, Qingwei Immortal Sect, and also our carefree travel. Therefore, Bitter Zen Temple doesn't dare to use cultivators of the perfected one and above to suppress them. Within the domain, it's just Jin Dan. This is also an old tradition. They can't say anything about it. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. Buddhism was greedy, Taoism was hypocritical. Since they couldn't spread their faith, they began to use underhanded methods. This was also an old tradition. My carefree travel and Wanyan's good fortune are both Taoists. We usually have good relations and have dealings with each other. Knowing that my carefree travel's Taoist heritage is more extensive, they hope that my carefree travel can directly participate in the Sword Vein's battle against Bitter Zen. I thought of you. I'll be honest. Originally, the mission for you to go to the Seven Colors wasn't like this. It was just a symbolic mission for sightseeing. It was that girl Kawa who pestered me to give it. But since it's a serious matter, of course it has to be serious. You won't have any complaints, right? Lu Xiaoyi had to act like a swordsman, so he was very straightforward. If there's a fight, I'll fight. If I can kill people, I won't have any complaints. Perfected Mo nodded in satisfaction. If this mission is done well, you can really stay in the carefree mask. I promise you. Lu Xiaoyi still had some misgivings. Perfected Mo, I know what the sect wants. They want me to return to the Seven Colors Sword sect, blend in, and take the opportunity to cause trouble for Bitter Zen Temple. But the sect also has its rules. For people like us who have submitted to the sect, we can't really come into contact with our original Taoist heritage for hundreds of years. This time, I'm returning mainly to see the old mountains and rivers, to reminisce. I don't dare to really come into contact with old people. But if I represent the Seven Colors Sword sect to go to the Shaking Shadow Realm, with my identity, even if I wear a mask, I won't be able to hide it from people. After all, there are so many familiar senior and junior brothers. Perfected Mo waved his hand. There are priorities. People are close and distant. How can I take care of all of them? If you return to the Seven Colors Sword sect with this condition, it'll be flawless. No one will be able to say anything. The Buddhist sect won't be able to find evidence that my Taoist heritage has personally acted. You're the most suitable candidate. As for those so-called rules, people are alive, but rules are dead. The Great Freedom Hall has given a proper mission for the Taoist heritage. It's clear. Who can blame you? There have been similar situations in the past. Don't take it seriously. Lu Xi asked with a smile. Then this disciple will take a mile when given an inch. While I'm trying my best to complete Carefree's mission, if there's a chance, I'd like to do something for the Seven Colors. Can you understand? Perfected Mo laughed loudly. I understand. If you don't do this, I'll really look down on you. Thinking about old people is a good disposition. I, Carefree Travel, will never punish you for this. Lu Xiaoyi asked again. I'm not the only one who's personally participating in the battle against the Bitter Zen Temple, right? The others. Perfected Mo nodded. You're very cautious. The other sects have also sent people. My Carefree sect isn't the only sect with swordsmen. The other sects have some as well, but I don't know who they've sent. Which sword vein they've hidden themselves in? Just like how I won't tell them that I, Carefree Travel, sent you 1 year. How do you consider that to have achieved your goal? Perfected Mo's eyes flashed fiercely. A battle is a must. Although our sects will maintain sufficient pressure, especially on other small continents that are fighting against the Bitter Zen Temple, we'll do our best to contain a large portion of their strength. However, the Bitter Zen Temple's strength cannot be underestimated. There are only 2 Buddhist sacred mountains in the Zhou-Xian upper realm. Their strength is very strong. If it were another orthodoxy, we wouldn't do this because the chances of success aren't high. However, swordsmen are more united, and their individual combat strength is also outstanding. Therefore, there's hope for a fight. The Battle of Jean Dan will be decided as a shaking shadow. This is everyone's consensus. Chapter 830. This mission was a little rushed, so Lu Xiaoyi didn't waste any time. However, he met senior sister Kawa before he left the crack. Obviously, she was waiting for him here. This mission isn't the one I found for you. She was a little apologetic. Because of her special status, she knew a little about this matter. Lu Xiaoyi smiled and said, Senior sister, don't worry. It's all the same to me. If I could choose, I would rather choose this mission. The ones who should be worried are the monks. Senior sister, do you have any Buddhist items that catch your eye? Should I snatch a few for you? Or should I snatch a beautiful little monk to relieve senior sister's boredom? Kawa scolded. A dog's mouth really can't spit out ivory. Seeing Lu Xiaoyi disappear into the crack, Kawa felt a sense of loss. She also wanted to go, but the sect didn't allow it. When the time came, a small battle between cultivators would break out in Shaking Shadow Little Land. Bitter Zen Temple versus Sword Vein Alliance. The various Taoist sects would strictly control their Jin Dan group and obtain the Buddhist sect's promise that the battle would be limited to the Jin Dan realm. No matter who won or lost, they would have to accept the result of this battle. In the eyes of the higher-ups, the cultivation world was a kind of art of compromise. The Buddhist sect occupied Shaking Shadow with their own abilities, while the Taoist sect wanted to cause trouble. This was the truth. Considering that the Taoist sect was strong and the Buddhist sect was weak, and considering that the Buddhist sect was in the right and the Taoist sect was in the wrong, this awkward situation was formed. The various Taoist sects could unconditionally support the Sword Vein Alliance in terms of resources, information, and transportation, but they had to be careful when it came to sending out people. Shaking Shadow Little Land was one of the countless bridgeheads that blocked the Buddhist sect's expansion, but it wasn't the only one. Regardless of whether it was the Taoist sect or the Buddhist sect, they didn't want to expand the battle for Shaking Shadow Little Land. It was a large-scale conflict led by the Yuanying and carried out by the Jin Dan. However, it was limited to this and didn't involve the true monarchs outside the universe. Therefore, the various Taoist sects could only send their best swordsmen, such as Singular from the free and unfettered tour. What made Kawa depressed was that this guy would always encounter the most turbulent incidents in the domain. In other words, trouble was always following him. His life was tense and exciting, but for someone as diligent as her, cultivators should grow in adversity. This could stimulate a person's greatest potential. But you can't look for trouble. For someone of Kawa's background, even if she wanted to be in adversity, it was not an easy thing to do. In Shaga, she almost succeeded in putting herself in danger, but in the end, this guy came out. She also wanted to immerse herself in such a grand and vigorous activity, but unfortunately, others didn't bring her along to play. Wait a minute! Kawa suddenly realized something. This guy never did anything without a purpose. Why was he in such a hurry to return to the Seven Colors? Did he really miss the mountains and rivers there? She didn't believe that a murderous person who had just joined the Carefree Guild would understand the meaning of love mountains and rivers. He must have a motive. What was it? Carefully recalling this guy's tracks, and based on their interactions in the past few days, Kawa realized something. Red Mound. Chamber of Commerce. 7 Colors. Kawa pursed her lips into a smile. Finally, I caught your tail. Lu Xi ran through the cracks in the space, and his heart was filled with emotions. His original purpose was not to do this. There were 2 reasons for coming to 7 Colors. First, he had to come. Even if he didn't do anything and didn't come into contact with anyone, he had to make a kind of decorative disguise for his identity. He had to make some specious things to deal with any possible interrogation. for a cultivator who came from the Seven Colors Sword sect and had cultivated in the sect for hundreds of years to really be able to ignore his homeland, this was not normal. Second, Yuan Ying said that the Red Earth Chamber of Commerce might come to Seven Colors to cause trouble. This was also his purpose. He wanted to attack these uninvited guests, and then take the opportunity to kill his way back to Red Mound. With his current strength, he didn't have to worry too much about the so-called unorthodox Yuan Ying. He had to find out who the one who attacked him in Yuhai was. Then, he would go to them and take back Ju City. The plan was well thought out, but once it was carried out, it immediately went awry and became embroiled in the feud between the Sword Vein and the Buddhists. He didn't dislike this, but he had to be careful. How should he handle the relationship with the Seven Colors Sword sect? Also, regarding the Red Earth Chamber of Commerce, he could only postpone it for now. As soon as he came out of the crack, 2 Jin Dan sword cultivators came to greet him. Right now, the Seven Colors Alliance was also a gathering place. Rogue sword cultivators from the surrounding small continents had been gathering here in an endless stream. Of course, there were also many who wanted to fish in troubled waters, so he had to be extra careful. Lu Xiaoyi didn't stop. He nodded in greeting, and the sword intent on his body expanded and retracted, indicating his purpose for coming. The 2 Seven Colors swordsmen cupped their fists in return. Needless to say, there was no need to doubt their purpose for coming here at this time. They were all waiting for a group fight. The Sword Vein seemed to have an inexplicable magical power. No matter which universe or world they were in, because of the sword, their temperament was always the same. It was one of the most cohesive orthodoxies in the universe. If a big power wanted to dig at the roots of the Sword Vein, it was inevitable that help would come from all directions. Of course, there were also many big Taoist sects adding fuel to the fire. According to the overall plan, after the swordsmen near the Seven Colors Sword sect gathered, they would all take the Cloud Sea flying ship to the yawning Shadowland. They couldn't use the crack, because the Bitter Zen Temple had already closed the crack teleportation portal to the yawning Shadowland. Without hesitation, he went straight to the Seven Colors Mountain where the Seven Colors Sword Vein was located. The Seven Colors Mountain of the Seven Colors Sword sect in the Seven Colors Small Land. This name was very lazy. In fact, on this land, the most famous thing was the Seven Colors Mountain. Because the mountain was tall and steep, different geological and ecological environments gave the mountain different colors. The lowest part was mineral brown, the highest part was snow white, and the middle part was either lush green or red leaves. Hence, the name Seven Colors was well deserved. He needed to join the Seven Colors Swordsman's team to have the qualifications to board the Cloud Sea flying ship. Otherwise, it would be too time-consuming to find it himself. At the same time, his arrival could also express the attitude of the Xiao Yaoyu. The first time he used the mask, he felt that there was no feeling at all. It was like a layer of activated skin, he could do whatever he wanted. He made himself look like the swordsman he killed in the land of exile. To a cultivator's memory, there was no problem at all. The use of the mask was not limited to this. It could also confuse a cultivator's breath, defend against mental attacks, and even block a part of the mysterious. There was one thing that Kawa was right about. This small, inconspicuous object was the peak embodiment of the Xiao Yaoyu's ability to make equipment. It was not only made to change the appearance. However, Lu Xiaoyi was very clear that no matter how well this thing imitated, it would never be able to replace the real one. No one was a fool. Chapter 831. Lu Xiaoyi nodded to the 2 Foundation Establishment swordsmen at the entrance of the Seven-Colored Mountain. Lead the way! The Foundation Establishment disciple obviously did not recognize him as a member of the sect from decades ago. He only thought that he was another swordsman who came to help and hurriedly led the way. Lu Xiaoyi did not inquire further. It was a last-minute effort, and it would not be appropriate no matter what, so it was better not to do so. Soon, They arrived in front of an unnamed hall. The Foundation establishment cultivator respectfully said, "Marshal Uncle Huang is in charge of receiving us. Shangjin, just go in." Lu Xiaoyi strode in. A Jin Dan sword cultivator in the hall revealed a look of surprise when he saw Lu Xiaoyi. He was a little suspicious, but it was also very real. He was not too sure. But Senior Marshal Brother Shan? Lu Xiaoyi sat down boldly. "That's right. How should I address you, fellow Taoist?" Junior Marshal Brother Huang was a little dumbfounded. How could this be? He had only left for less than 100 years. How could he not recognize the Senior Marshal Brother that he had spent so much time with? "I'm Huang Jin. Senior Marshal Brother Shan doesn't remember me? Ever since Senior Marshal Brother was summoned, there has been no news of you. Later there was news that Senior Marshal Brother had died outside, but the lantern in the mountain gate was not extinguished. Thus I knew that Senior Marshal Brother had gone somewhere else. It was not good to ask, so I destroyed the lantern and pretended not to know. But what happened to Senior Marshal Brother? Once you return, you don't even recognize your old friends?" Lu Xiaoyi was Dafa. "I'm single-eared. I'm from the Seven-Colored Mountain. There's no mistake about this. But I don't recognize any of the people and scenery of the Seven-Colored Mountain. I haven't lost my memories. Do you understand, Junior Marshal Brother Huang?" Junior Marshal Brother Huang did not fully understand. The only thing he could do now was to immediately inform the senior Jin Dan in the sect. In the Seven-Color Sword sect they had a supreme, but he spent most of his time roaming the universe and never meddled in the affairs of the domain. His attitude was exactly the same as the few Yuanying swordsmen in the sect. It was not that they really did not care, but their status did not allow them to meddle. If they really took action, who would be able to resist the hundreds of Buddhas and hundreds of Bodhisattvas in the Bitter Zen temple? Only people at the level of Jin Dan could be responsible for it. This kind of propriety was very clear to the small businesses. Not long after, 5 Jin Dan swordsmen arrived on their swords. Because of Junior Brother Huang's warning, they were very calm. Among them, Jin Dan, the leader, was very polite. "I am Gao Yang, the representative of the Sharpening Sword Hall." "This is Zongqian, the head of the sect, Bo Luyuan, the guardian of the sword, Guan Mingwei, the elder, Qi Zishan. May I ask?" Lu Xiaoyi still said the same thing. "It's the first time we've met." "How fortunate! I was ordered by Xiaoyao to help you. I only have one ear." "Your junior brother only has one ear." The few Jin Dan men were all experienced Old Dawn. Once they heard his words, they understood. This was a swordsman from Xiaoyaoyu. He was using the name of one ear to participate in the battle. This was an old trick used by the Jin Dan men. It was to cover one's ears and steal a bell, for the sake of the so-called rules. Gao Yu said cautiously, "Thank you, fellow Taoist, for coming from afar. We of the 7 colors welcome you with open arms. However, there's something I don't know if it's appropriate to ask. Is my junior brother doing well in Xiaoyaoyu?" Lu Xiaoyi evaded the question. "I am your junior brother. This is the truth. I'm not here to participate in the decision-making. I'm purely here to fight. Inform me when you board the boat. If you need me, I'll be in charge of the deployment." After he finished speaking, he didn't wait for their reply. He walked out of the hall and found a random place to sit cross-legged and adjust his breathing. His behavior made the few swordsmen of the 7 colors slightly dissatisfied. However, they couldn't say anything. He was an inner sect disciple. He had high aspirations and was very arrogant. Although he didn't answer the question, it was good that he said he wouldn't interfere in the decision-making. Zongqian shook his head. "This is great. A Master Xiaoyao has come. You and I have to serve him well. I wonder how junior brother One Ear is doing?" Gao Yu sighed. "This is the rule of the 9 great sects. Those who leave are like spilled water. It's also the rule that he doesn't answer. If he does, what can we do? Well, since he said so, we'll just pretend that he's One Ear." Xiao Yaoyu is very cautious. He even pretended to be one ear. Sword Guardian Guan Minghua was the only female cultivator among them. She had to be more careful. It might not be on purpose. Maybe this person is Xiao Yaoyu. When everyone heard this, they felt that it made sense. Elder Qi Zishan laughed and said, I was wondering why Xiao Yaoyu was so stingy this time. They have a few sword cultivators under them, but they only sent one person over for this occasion. If it's Xiao Yaoyu, then it makes sense. Zhong Qian snorted. Let's hope he lives up to his name. Of course, the coarse strength of the upper sex doesn't need to be mentioned. However, I don't believe that he can surpass us in terms of swordsmanship. Maybe he's just a swordsman. He's still a Dharma cultivator at his core. Gao Yu decided. That's right. He's still a helper. He's one ear, and one ear is him. Don't talk about whether it's real or fake. It's meaningless. You have to remember that you have to solve your own problems. It's unrealistic to expect help from others. The Tao Sect's Dharma branches added fuel to the fire this time, but they did it for their own sake. They don't see the sword vein as family. We're in the sword vein for our own orthodoxy. It doesn't matter if there's help or not. We have to do what needs to be done. We'll wait for 3 more days and arrange the defense of 7 Colors Mountain. We'll set off immediately. Lu Xiaoyi found a random place and silently observed the swordsman orthodoxy. 7 Colors left a good impression on him. It had the valiant charm of a swordsman, which made him feel a sense of approval. Over the next few days there were also individual swordsmen from other continents who gathered here. They didn't come here for a reward, and no one would give them a reward. They just felt that as members of the orthodoxy, they should step forward bravely. This was a battle that neither side tried to hide. The Bitter Zen Temple didn't seem to care about the gathering of swordsmen's sections. It could be that they wanted to make an example out of the swordsman's sects, or it could be that they were pressured by the other upper sects. The Bitter Zen Temple was one of the stronger sects among the 9 great mountain sects. Even the Carefree Wandering sect had 5,000 Jing Dan sects, so the Bitter Zen Temple had even more. Excluding those who couldn't be mobilized, those who were restrained, and those who couldn't be contacted, it wasn't difficult to gather 1,000 or 2,000. However, it was hard to say how many Sword Vein could gather. Along the way, he glanced around. The scale of the 7 Colors Sword sect was also very limited. This was also the helplessness of the unorthodox sections. How many cultivators could they raise in such a small place? Although he wasn't too sure about the overall strength of the Upper Realm Sword Vein Alliance in Zhou, the key to a group fight was cooperation. On this point, the Sword Vein was naturally at a disadvantage. In addition, there were also the problems of command, coordination, and fighting on their own. This was a big scene. It was the first time for him to fight with thousands of people. Although the 5th ring was a den of bandits, they had good control in this aspect. This kind of fight wasn't very useful for accumulating battle experience, but it would cause a huge loss to the core Jing Dan sects of the cultivation world. The gains didn't make up for the losses. He didn't know how much he could do in this, but he did his best. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.